Hello and welcome to Six Part. Today I'm gonna start a new series. What if Deku could copy and enhance Quirk? Part 1. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a big thumbs up, and to watch more videos like this, subscribe to my channel and turn that bell notification on so you never miss an upload. Now wasting no more time, let's begin.
Special talents acquired from birth, such as fire breath, teleportation, laser eyes, or anything else you may imagine, are quirks in the truth of this world. Humanity had to undergo a profound metamorphosis in order to adjust to this new normal, as the whole foundation of civilization had been upended by these newly discovered abilities. It was a turbulent and revolutionary process of adjustment over several hundred years. Current scientific estimates place the number of people with a quirk in the world at an astounding 80%, with only 20% quirkless. It was inevitable that some would use their gifts for evil since the great majority possessed a variety of godlike skills. Superpower-fueled criminal activity swiftly surfaced, bringing to the public's attention a role that had only been seen in fiction until recently: that of a superhero. They were carefully conditioned and authorized to use their peculiarities in public, protecting and preserving humanity against the dangers of those who would abuse their abilities. Heroes became beacons of hope, idols, and role models for everyone to follow in this world of superpowers, representing peace and prosperity. This remarkable occurrence became the cornerstone of modern society, which was built on the idea of heroes, vigilant sentinels who upheld order in a time when eccentricity was the norm. Izuku Midoriya was born 14 years ago into a world where eccentricities were the norm. He had never given much thought to how life could have been different if there had been no peculiarities, but sometimes he wondered if it would have been easier, even nicer. He was among the unfortunate individuals who were labeled as quirkless, a designation that had been validated by a medical diagnosis at the age of 4. Back then, the news had not been favorably received. Izuku's desire to become a hero was ingrained in his entire essence. It was the only goal he had in mind when he thought about his future. Was it unexpected? The spirit of heroism infused society everywhere, influencing its basic fabric. If someone could ignore this, it would be like looking up at the night sky and not seeing the stars. His viewpoint, however, didn't seem to be shared by the culture around him. If only he could explain his peculiarity to them, something he couldn't show off with his body, such as a store of infinite wisdom or a lightning-fast mind. Such an epiphany could have saved him from the constant torture he suffered, the unrelenting harassment that had slowly eroded his fortitude. In the present, it was a Friday morning, a day that held great importance. Izuku was on his way to Aldera High, but he was aware that this school was coming to an end. He would finally reap the rewards of his painstaking preparations. He had painstakingly planned for online education, something he had been reluctant to tell his mother, Inko. Unexpectedly, she not only supported the plan but had even considered it herself. She was afraid her son would think she was being unkind to him, so she never dared to bring up the subject with him. Izuku, in her opinion, was anything from weak, and she couldn't stand to be the one to push him in the direction of something that might do harm. She had held back because she loved him. He was so grateful for his mother's support. Izuku didn't care if his heroic aspirations were shattered. The idea of hanging around with the same people who had made him feel the resentment of bullying seemed like a bother. He said he would rather take a swan dive off the roof than go through such a situation. Izuku couldn't help but laugh at his own depressing comment at the same time, picturing how amusing it would be to capture such a confession and send it to the UA. In relation to that, UA, formerly called Ultra Academia, was the top hero school in Japan. Despite Katsuki Bakugo's continuous thorn in his side, his ambition remained unwavering. Before Katsuki's fixation on his exploding quirk destroyed their friendship, they were pals. While the concept of accumulating evidence to report Katsuki's bullying behavior to UA was alluring, but the possible reward didn't seem worth the effort. Aldera High went to great lengths to protect Katsuki from repercussions, even surpassing the scope of a political or economic scandal. However, the possibility of documenting Katsuki's encouragement to suicide? That would have been worth more than gold mines. Regardless of his destiny with UA, Izuku's life was about to change. A different strategy was in the works. Making money off of his oddity analysis. He was informed he would not have any quirks, but the idea of having one still fascinated him. Not because he was obsessed with getting one himself, but rather because he genuinely loved peculiarities as an idea. He couldn't help but record and examine anything that caught his attention, uncovering its most profound mysteries. Izuku was unsure of the precise moment he started down this route, but he was positive he wouldn't get weary of it anytime soon. His room was filled with notebooks full with drawings, formulas, and thoughts. A dozen notebooks, or a dozen lifetimes of delving into the complexities of peculiarities. Unfortunately, he became a figurative target because of his excitement for unusual information. Naturally, this desire was not indulged in Aldera's hallways. Having barely saved his last notepad after Katsuki detonated an explosion on it, he had learned his lesson. Katsuki's peculiarity couldn't, at least, start actual fires. The road to UA for Izuku stayed in a state of expectation. The clamor and excitement that filled the classroom when their teacher handed out forms for next year's orientation served as a reminder that the goal was attainable. He was aware of how these situations frequently transpired. Izuku smiled quietly as he made up answers, laughing as he considered the least obvious options. Izuku skillfully avoided bullies as the day progressed into lunch, turning his avoidance into a jolt of excitement. But underlying this seemingly ordinary lunch break, Izuku had a secret, a talent that gave him a keen sense of safe routes, like the tides guiding a ship across dangerous waters. An assembly was held in the afternoon, and the instructor quickly went over the orientation forms. Everyone in the class agreed that their first priority was to pursue Hero Academia. The teacher watched, unfazed, as classmates briefly displayed their eccentricities. As expected, Katsuki made a sweeping declaration, mocking his peers and reveling in his apparent greatness. However, Izuku made an interesting discovery as a result of his careful observation of the scene as it developed. The teacher noticed a page corner that Izuku had folded himself, inconspicuously. Was his belief that his plan had been successful wishful thinking? However, in Izuku's view, Katsuki's flamboyant win seemed far away, its brilliance diminished. Izuku left Aldera in a covert manner, sufficiently covert to avoid the school's notice until the conclusion of the year. There would undoubtedly be speculation, but it was unclear what would happen in the end. Would Aldera authorities harass his mother in an attempt to get her to return Izuku to their control, or would they brush off his absence as a minor matter? It would be a serious mistake for the school to underestimate Inko's resolve, because beneath her seemingly harmless eccentricity was an unbreakable spirit that would go to great measures to keep her son safe. Regarding his father, his presence was a vague mystery, a blank in Izuku's consciousness. Unsettling concerns were generated by his mother's description of his father's employment and financial assistance abroad. The riches inflow, which could provide for them for millennia, looked out of scale. However, such kindness was insufficient to excuse his father's desertion. Izuku was supported by his mother's unwavering resilience as he struggled with this heartbreaking reality. How did Izuku handle these turbulent seas, especially as a seeming outcast in a world full of eccentrics? Ironically, the answer was that he had a personal peculiarity. It had never really been his objective, he just happened to stumble upon it. He was playing with his mother when he was 8 years old when they were both startled by a strange feeling. At first, Inko brushed it off as just static electricity and they didn't think about it. But 2 weeks later, Izuku was looking for his alarm clock and couldn't find it since his nightstand seemed abnormally far away. He fell out of bed and hit his head on a floating object by mistake. Izuku, wearing his all-might pajamas, rushed into his mother's bed in a fit of enthusiasm and yelled loudly that he had a quirk. They sat in the living room after 10 or so minutes. Izuku had found that his new power mostly entailed a pulling sensation, and he had activated it rather easily. He asked his mother to demonstrate because he was curious about her experience, but she was unable to do so. She had no feelings at all. Despite the awkwardness of the situation, both mother and son had a good idea of what may have happened. The stillness was broken first by Inko. While acknowledging that she understood the problem and joking that she had spent a small fortune, quirk-proofing their house when Izuku was younger, she reassured Izuku that everything was fine. Izuku missed school that day as a result. They spent hours trying to figure out when the change had occurred and trying to come up with a method to undo Inko's peculiarity. They looked through publications, searched the internet, and contemplated consulting Katsuki's mother, Mitsuki, for guidance. But in the end, they chose not to involve anybody else in their personal issue. Looking back, Izuku saw how unprepared he was to have his own quirk, and he was still unsure of its actual limits. Inko eventually regained her quirk, and she advised her son to exercise this quirk for some time. It was the sensible thing to do. Izuku had a lot of ground to cover. He should have spent the 4 years he missed practicing and exercising his peculiarity. But a peculiarity that might appropriate other peculiarities, it was eerie. Instead of focusing on him because he didn't have a quirk, people would probably avoid and isolate him out of concern that their peculiarities would be taken away. They would do just that. Izuku considered himself more of a visionary than a dreamer, although he was not excessively hopeful. He had a realistic view of the world. People weren't always good. However, some were compassionate enough to motivate others. So, until he could apply to UA, Izuku kept his quirk a secret. He thought that by then, he would not be bothered by the responses of others. Inko and Izuku continued their training day after day. As he grew older, he saw the full power of his peculiarity. He started to pick up on oddities around him and, if he focused hard enough, could see where they were in space. He made another unintentional discovery that gave him the power to force someone to use their quirk, but he promised to reserve this power for dire situations. Izuku had to buy groceries before he could go back to his apartment. His mother, a stay-at-home mom who recognized Izuku's need for social contact, was unemployed. It was good to walk into a store, meet a stranger without fear, and walk out feeling normal, he agreed with her. Izuku decided to take a detour in order to get his mind straight. He hadn't thought about what they would do in the event that online learning didn't work out. They hadn't looked into other choices, and to be honest, changing schools wouldn't really change anything. All of a sudden, he felt threatened from behind, as if someone were pursuing him. A bit scrawny, but it'll do for now. Before Izuku could even turn, a huge ball of goo with a face jumped at him. When no one else was available to assist, a villain was present. Self-analysis swept through Izuku. But at least he could let go of some of the anxiety he had been holding inside. The criminal moved too quickly to avoid detection. It engulfed Izuku, making him concentrate and master the slime's peculiarity. Unable to fully grasp it, he staggered a little, but he was still able to give the villain a pounding headache. The slime backed off as though it had noticed something strange. Izuku had a hard time breathing. The slime was slithering away into the sewers, not coming back. Izuku thought he was becoming sick since he was weak and coughing. The discomfort continued and grew worse. He was able to open his suitcase at last. He needed to call someone for help because he was getting weaker by the second. But when he tried to yell, nothing came out. It wasn't fair. This couldn't be the end. He collapsed on the ground as he saw a towering, black figure. A death harbinger, approach. Or maybe not. When he woke up again, he recognized the quiet street where the attack had taken place. He was leaning against a wall after being moved. He checked his possessions and discovered his suitcase next to him undamaged. A voice said, "That must have been quite a trip." Izuku turned his head and saw the same man, standing about a meter away, that he had seen briefly before passing out. According to the speaker, the man was tall, even taller than All Might, if not for his metamorphosis. The man wore a formal suit, and a black metal helmet in the shape of a skull covered his head. Suddenly Izuku's peculiarity awakened. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but there was something strange about this man's eccentricity. Some people felt empty and hungry, while others felt like different identities were entangled. Close call, isn't it? I understand the sentiment. The stranger's remarks brought the young man back to the present. Despite his wicked appearance, his words was almost nice. Izuku had been on the verge of death just a minute before. He asked, Did you save me? Yes, I was pursuing this parasite. Had I arrived a few seconds earlier, I might have foiled its escape using a child. I shall ensure the perpetrator pays for that as well, replied the man. Perhaps it was Izuku's eccentricity that was making his manner more bearable. Izuku wondered what the peculiarity of the man might be. I'm 14, responded Izuku. The man shrugged and said, but still too young for liquor or driving, I assume. You determine adulthood based on alcohol and a driver's license? Replied Izuku. It seemed strange to give in, but the man had a point when he said, not me. It appears to be the law's definition, doesn't it? Izuku was about to go when he remembered he had a chance to ask, yeah. I suppose. Well, thanks for rescuing me, anyway. This individual didn't appear to be prejudiced against eccentricities. I have a question. Izuku thought he might have phrased it strangely, and the man's calmness faltered for a moment. Go ahead, the man said after a while. I want your opinion. Can someone be a hero without a quirk? It was a lengthy pause before the man spoke again, as if he was about to chuckle but held himself back. He crossed his arms and turned his attention from the subject to Izuku. You're truly asking, I see. I'm not precisely the best person to offer an answer, if I'm being honest. Izuku gave his head a scratch. But you're a hero, aren't you? You should know. This observation was not well received by the man. His presence became more powerful, almost dangerous, and he asked, a hero? What prompts that assumption? Izuku, however, had no intention of backing down. You saved me, right? Isn't that your duty? I don't comprehend how people could stand by while someone is suffering. Although people like me have ceased waiting for a hero to arrive and rescue us, I'm still grateful that you were here. What if I disclosed that it was all mere coincidence? Would your gratitude remain? Yes. The man stopped. Izuku began to question himself. The outfit was too obvious, and the peculiarity wasn't any better. I'm not a hero. If you cling to that perception, you're even more naive than I presumed. However, he wasn't prepared to hear it straight from the source. What sort of villain would make such an introduction? You don't really behave like one. The man raised his arms in an odd gesture and added, you're smart enough to distinguish between petty criminals and a real threat to society. I'm superior to those lowlifes who rob stores and act like loan sharks. Izuku stammered, feeling silly for showing vulnerability to a total stranger who might be insane. But you could have just said that initially. Then I wouldn't have bothered you with, may I leave now? I shouldn't even be having this conversation. No obligations tethering you here, provided you assure me you won't expire en route. That would be a pity. The main street is a few blocks away. I'd offer to accompany you, but I still have some sludge to apprehend. The man returned to Izuku. Izuku took his school bag and started to leave the man, saying, I can manage, thank you. He kept his quirk alert, looking for danger. But the man didn't stop him, unless. Regarding your question, Izuku turned his attention to the individual. Before I respond, what propels you? Why aspire to be a hero? There must be something compelling you toward this path. Why did he do it? Izuku had spent years thinking about this issue. I wish to inspire people. I can't save everyone, that's not the point. However, if I can bring a smile to someone's face, my dream will hold significance. Someone, somewhere in the world, will always need a savior desperately. If I rescue someone, will they be inclined to assist others? The man summed up, sounds like you're pursuing hope. He implied that Izuku was desperate, which is not totally different from the reality, when he said, a rather cruel falsehood. Yet humanity has subsisted on lies since the dawn of societies. Hope is what people grasp when reason falters. In theory, you could be as much a hero as anyone else. There was a time when power wasn't synonymous with quirks. If one exerted the effort, they could be as effective as the prominent heroes. Izuku has never before heard a direct response to this query. To the best of his memory, no one else had tried to help him. He needed to hear those words, and he didn't care if they came from a villain at this point. He delivered this counter-argument like a hammer blow, but practically, society won't permit a quirkless individual to become a hero. Not after investing so much in propagating the image of these mighty heroes who save the day with a grin. Society presently molds its citizens through heroes and villains, while compliant citizens find themselves ensnared in the middle. Justice is no longer the focus. The man moved towards Izuku. You possess a robust aspiration and determination, yet you're lacking a pivotal element. If you want to be remembered, you must take the necessary steps to bring about change. I'm not sure I understand. Izuku was unable to think of a creative response or anything useful, so he just said, it's not something I can elaborate. When the occasion arises, you'll confront the question and determine your course. I'm finished here. You're free to leave, and don't let your quirk frighten you. You can achieve great things. He lied. I said I don't possess a quirk, since this man could not have seen his powers in operation. Izuku has taken care to only use his quirk by physical contact. His arms were folded. He mumbled something, but Izuku was unable to make out what it was. I guess it's time for me to go. Good luck. Then, like a character in an animated film, he disappeared. Izuku honestly pondered the nature of his oddity. Maybe teleportation. No, that didn't feel quite right. The store could close before he got there, so Izuku thought he'd better get on with his life and shake his head. Sitting at her desk, Inko arranged the paperwork needed for Izuku to be enrolled in the online course. After sorting through the specifics, she discovered that the price was much less than Aldera's disorganized fees. She had maternal remorse for failing to gain her son's trust. There was still a lot to deal with, but perhaps things would get better from here on. She was distracted by a knock on the door. She thought about Izuku, but he would enter with his keys. No delivery was anticipated either. With a rising sensation of dread, she left the living room and went to the front door. How could she have forgotten that foreboding atmosphere? Without verifying, she opened the door and said, Shigaraki, what a surprise. All for One was in front of her, his presence indisputable. He did, however, wear his helmet, which is uncommon unless there was a particular occasion. Uncertain of what she might have done to warrant his presence, Inko started to feel threatened. If it isn't Inko, I apologize for my unannounced visit. I was in the vicinity, attending to some pressing matters, and recalled you were nearby. I thought I could drop by. Unless you're preoccupied, of course. The antagonist was courteous. Inko moved aside to let All for One into her apartment, saying, Oh, no, I was. It can wait. Just filling out some papers and forms. Please, come in. Instead. She looked over his shoulder, half expecting someone to follow, though Shigaraki most likely used a variety of idiosyncrasies to hide his identity. All for One's remark was straightforward and not meant to be offensive. So, this is your residence? Sending you millions each month, and you're content with this place? She gestured for him to join her in the kitchen, saying, if I suddenly buy a mansion without a job, it wouldn't end well. This place is perfect. It's close to shops, the neighborhood is mostly peaceful, and the internet service is excellent. I only have tea, I've moved past my drinking days. For a brief while, All for One appeared uneasy. I appreciate it, but I won't need a drink, thank you. Inko gave him a suspicious look. As she was making tea and searching the drawers for biscuits, Inko's inquiry surfaced. Why the helmet? Are you out to harm someone? As a matter of fact, I am dealing with a particular individual. I nearly apprehended them, but I was momentarily sidetracked. The helmet is essential. There's a considerable amount of damage from a few years ago. Until I locate the right quirk to address the issue, I'm stuck with it. Inko's heart pounded. She had seen All for One burned, impaled, and even had his body stretched for absorption by a quirk. And yet, someone had hurt him. May I see it? Sighing, All for One. It's not a sight you'll find pleasant, Inko. You don't. Please, this changes everything. Just how much suffering did you endure? Inko sat next to All for One and took his enormous, chilly hand in her own. I've been wondering why you abruptly withdrew from communication approximately 10 years ago. I figured you were busy, and I didn't mind. Our business had completed. Even if All for One could sense her disgust and the fear in her head, Inko maintained her composure and said, you should have seen the condition of my opponent. What they did to me pales in comparison to what I inflicted. Does it still cause you pain? All for One held out his palm in front of his face as if trying to grasp something. No, not anymore. Yet, there's a perpetual sensation of emptiness, something missing. I was careless, allowing that blonde imbecile to grow stronger while I was preoccupied fixing what? I shouldn't mention her, I apologize. He mentioned her mother, Nana Shimura, but just by title, which Inko didn't mind. For understandable reasons, Inko almost forgot that Shigaraki was unaware of her son. She abandoned me. I don't care what you did to her, even if I were threatened by the devil himself. Which, as far as I know, isn't more potent or influential than you. I'd never forsake. Izuku. Izuku. You have a child? Inko clarified, yes, I had him a few months after I retired. So, you got married, perhaps a little too aggressively, she interrupted. No, his father left when Izuku was diagnosed as quirkless. Inko changed the subject of the conversation. Inko acknowledged the existence of her nephew, but she and Shigaraki had long before decided that it might not be a good idea to introduce the poor youngster to any other living relatives. How is Tenko? I mean, Tamura. That's the name he chose, right? Inko asked. He's well, I assure you. If not, Inko might have completed the task. She was aware that her quirk could be lethal quickly and silently if she so wished. Inko was an exception to Shigaraki's temptation. I've been asking him about his aspirations. He seems determined to follow in my footsteps. Inko gave a feeble smile. A father figure, who would have thought? Believe me, I saw it coming. I'm many things, Inko, but I wouldn't be fit for the responsibility if my child's safety were compromised. Inko was nervous. At least they agreed that their kids should stay as far away from him as possible. I'm not a good father or a positive role model. But for Tamura, it was likely too late. So, my nephew is becoming a villain. What exactly is he planning? He started All for One, then coughed a lot. Despite his best efforts, he had to eventually put his helmet back on. Apologies. As I was saying, Tamura has matured, his trauma impacting him less. Still, he's unwavering in his resolve to target those responsible for a society that ostracizes outcasts and turns its populace into puppets. I'm paraphrasing. Inko laughed. At least he has a goal, but I was asking about his strategy. Oh, his plans, yes. Well, it commences with All Might's demise. Inko was on the verge of spilling her teacup on the table. Tamura, who had just escaped All Might's power, was unprepared to deal with the hero's entire force. You need to intervene. This is a terrible idea. If not for All Might's weakened state, I would have. I ensured his days as a hero would be numbered, inflicting severe damage to his stomach during our last confrontation. He can't maintain more than 2 or 3 hours of active service daily. All for One seemed at ease. Tamura is capable. If he remains convinced, I'll support him with the necessary resources. Leaning back on her seat, Inko looked up at the ceiling. My family seems to be cursed with some sort of mental affliction. My mother chose to abandon her children rather than retreat from a battle she couldn't win. My brother turned into an abusive monster because of it. I embraced vigilantism and made it my livelihood. And now my nephew is poised to become the next symbol of fear. At least my son is normal. Please refrain from suggesting that we're too old for the... After nearly losing her temper with All for One, Inko said, I'm 40, of course, we're getting older, but you encouraging him is even worse. Shigaraki got up from his chair and walked around the table until he was standing behind Inko. There was a time when, unless my memory betrays me, I knew a young woman who believed that no one was beyond reach. The villain's dramatic flair caused her to roll her eyes. She made 5 attempts to vanquish the devil. Inko corrected, 4. I count the collapsed building as an attempt. It wasn't meant for you, I swear. Inko automatically pulled All for One's arms around her neck and said, anyway, they became friends, close friends, and partners above all. They had their fun for a while and eventually realized it was time to move on, back to their individual lives. If you're trying to make me cry, you're failing miserably, Inko laughed. Feels like I'm close to it. Should I eliminate your ex-husband for leaving? I could suggest something quite spectacular. Ha ha ha, no, please. It's not worth the trouble. Izuku and I are content with our current situation. After finishing her tea, Inko trembled as All for One described a young guy. As you wish. By the way, I encountered a young man. Quite brilliant, really. I happened upon him while pursuing a former associate. He pretended to be quirkless. Of all the good fortune. Pretended? He had a quirk? Yes, I barely had the opportunity to witness it in action. I truly wish I could possess a quirk like his. I've never encountered one that specifically targets other quirks. Aside from mine, naturally. To keep her cool, Inko tightened her jaw. Izuku found the description to be accurate, and meeting him was the last thing she wanted. You didn't steal his quirk, did you? Especially not from a child. Even in irony, All for One's chuckle maintained its menacing tone. I'm not a monster. We had a very enlightening conversation. He even dubbed me a hero. Me ha ha ha. Oh, how time flies. I must be on my way, but I promise to keep in touch. The villain bowed and disappeared into a puddle of black muck, saying, just concentrate on staying alive. I'm not here to be your bodyguard anymore. Inko looked at the digital clock on the kitchen wall and said, and he's just showing off. Izuku was probably making a significant detour since he was aware of how uneasy he felt in crowded areas. Izuku was on high alert on Friday, the worst day for grocery shopping, because there were too many people there, mainly children, who were playing with their oddities. His hunger was bothering him, and he wished he could eat something to divert his attention. He eventually made it to the front of the line, gave the cashier his money, and went back outside. He was able to concentrate more easily as his peculiarity calmed down. This made it possible for Izuku to see that Katsuki and his gang, or lackeys, followers, or whatever Katsuki called them, were not coming his way. Unwilling to risk anything, he turned into the side streets, where the cacophony died down and the overwhelming presence of innumerable eccentricities diminished. In times like this, he couldn't help but agree with his classmates when they branded him a psycho. However, the momentary respite he felt was replaced by yet another reason to freeze, this time because of the unmistakable sludge quirk he was all too familiar with, rather than Katsuki. Like the last time, he was being pursued by a villain out for vengeance. Must he turn around? To save his life, should he allow Katsuki to publicly disgrace him? The villain with the skull had whispered to him, don't let your quirk frighten you. You can achieve great things. As the muck approached, Izuku continued to advance and, for the first time, found himself by himself. This time, he would not be a victim. Izuku turned and threw his arms out toward the ominous bulk as the sludge lunged. He smiled as a crimson glow swirled at his fingertips. The sludge must have been so certain of its victim that it believed it had captured him helpless and alone. What a mistake! They were now falling on Izuku's outstretched hand, impaling themselves as they fell toward their own death. Considering the suffering he could cause in exchange, Izuku accepted the villain's peculiarity. Screaming and writhing, the muck folded in on itself. They were losing ground. Izuku pushed his peculiarity farther than ever before, and fatigue started to crawl over him. He had never sensed so much of his potential and had never gone this far. Izuku began pulling his hand away from the gooey mass as the villain's movements halted and their shouts faded. Then a voice screamed, smash! And a huge force smashed close by. Then all was dark. Izuku survived. In fact, He had twice in one day come back from the edge of death. Even though it sounded impressive, he didn't want to go through that again. He was tired from utilizing his quirk on the villain, but he was alright overall. However, where was the bad guy? Izuku looked about and found his possessions. With one notable exception, the symbol of peace himself was in front of him. The sight seemed uncannily familiar. The top hero grinned and laughed as he said, "Ah, you're finally awake. A few more minutes, and I would have had to make a big leap to the nearest hospital." Izuku stammered, standing on the wall behind him for support. All might. The statement, the one and only, was astounding. In front of him was the symbol of peace. What if this was heaven and he was dead? No, it wasn't like that. He imagined that if it were paradise, he wouldn't still experience All Might's oddity. All Might's quirk was much odd than the one he had seen today. It was both empty and full of something that was always expanding, a changing emptiness trying to fill itself. Against the chaos of the skull villain's peculiarity, there was a feeling of order. The hero pointed to a tiny bottle fastened to his left leg and said, "I heard your screams from blocks away and sprinted as fast as I could. No worries, this fiend won't harm anyone for a long while." Although the villain was legally the victim in this situation, Izuku felt bad because he couldn't change the fate that was in store for them. "I must return to my duties now. Stay safe, citizen." Wait. The hero was going to fly away, and despite his weakness, Izuku was able to push himself away from the wall and cling to the leg of the symbol of peace, though it wasn't the best course of action. They were suddenly in the air, a few dozen meters above the streets. What are you doing? Please let go of my leg." If I do that, I will fall," Izuku said, his face beaten by the wind, but he got his point out. "Oh, quite right," the hero said as he arrived lightly atop an apartment complex. Izuku's landing was less elegant than All Might's. Something about the symbol of peace seemed strange to him as he brushed himself off. He emitted smoke, and at the same time, Izuku felt All Might's peculiarity wane. The hero fought to maintain his composure and prevent regress, but Izuku realized that there was nothing else to do. I'm really so sorry, but I had a question to ask you all." As the smoke grew thicker, Izuku noticed an extremely slender, blonde man who had All Might's peculiarity in the haze. He was coughing up blood while sitting on the ground. Might? Izuku could have questioned this man's identity if it weren't for his specialty. The atmosphere and the once bright smile were gone. Izuku felt that this was not something he should be seeing. He pulled a tissue out of his rucksack and presented it to All Might. "For the blood." All Might cleansed the blood around his mouth after accepting the tissue. "I apologize if I..." "No, you're not at fault. But please keep this to yourself." All Might showed off a horrifying scar when he raised his shirt. Izuku swallowed. Such an injury wasn't real. It was the stuff of movies. "I had a battle about a decade ago. I met my match, and I did win, but at a tremendous cost. This was kept hidden from the public." "Toxic chainsaw. That's the battle you're referring to, right?" Izuku's response was evident from All Might's face. As the symbol of peace, it makes sense to conceal such a fight. All Might stretched and looked about. "Your research is impressive. My responsibilities extend beyond heroics. It's not a complete lie. I'll keep at it until someone can take up my mantle." In a reprimanding tone, the hero said, "I guess I'm done for today. But why did you grab my leg? You could have gotten yourself killed." All Might took a moment to respond. I had a question. Do you think someone without a quirk can become a hero? Can someone become like you? Can I inspire hope in people without a quirk?" With a touch of conflict in his gaze, the symbol of peace remained motionless. There was a long pause before All Might responded. "No." Izuku's entire world fell apart. What? It didn't feel right. The greatest Japanese hero, the symbol of peace, of all people, just said no? It might be tough, but if you work hard enough, you can achieve it, is not even mentioned. Instead, they simply, "We were just like everyone else." All Might went on to advise Izuku to think about pursuing a career in law enforcement. Heroes risked their lives for their jobs, he continued, and Izuku would only wind up a victim if he didn't have a quirk to protect himself. Izuku's thoughts were lost in a whirl. The symbol of peace had vanished by the time he looked up again. Izuku laughed as loudly as he was able to manage. He had only ever been inspired to be a hero by a villain. He thought about lying down for a while, messaging his mother that he was feeling ill and that he needed to spend an hour by himself. But the place was a hive of activity. A crowd had gathered in the area. What could be garnering so much interest as the day went on? Maybe another villain-on-villain encounter? In an attempt to forget how his idol had crushed his dreams, he made the decision to look into it. The sound of explosions came from a small street. It didn't look like a villain attack. Among the audience, a few professional heroes stood and stared at the scene of the mayhem. Izuku moved between the civilians, cautious with his hands, intrigued. He was tired from his previous run-in with the sludge and didn't want to make a commotion. And the sludge villain had somehow escaped All Might just when he thought his day couldn't be any more exciting. Izuku could infer how it had occurred. The villain was holding a captive, therefore the heroes did not act. More specifically, Katsuki Bakugo. Izuku thought, serves him right, yet Katsuki's desperate attempts to escape were the reason behind the explosions and the devastation. He had to see everyone fail to assist him, and in exchange, he had to put up with being the victim in front of everyone. The heroes said without action, we need to wait for someone with a stronger quirk to intervene. They were willing to let Katsuki to die in order to prevent a potentially dangerous circumstance. Izuku looked about in the hopes of finding help or at least giving directions. He looked away, but All Might was there, watching. Izuku felt a wave of nausea. Was even the symbol of peace surrendering? The skull villain's words were echoed. If you want to be remembered, you must take the necessary steps to bring about change. Izuku clenched his fist, dismissing All Might's assertion. He was going to disprove them all. He gathered all his power and ran for the villain, crossing the security line. The heroes said, it's dangerous. Get back. He hardly heard them, though. He concentrated on holding his peculiarity in check until the appropriate time. It was more hungry than ever. The villain's grip on Katsuki appeared to loosen as they appeared to sense it as well. The sludge was immobilized by fear. Izuku flung his bag at the villain's face 5 meters away, briefly diverting its attention. Then he stabbed its body with his left hand, using his quirk to damage the sludge. Katsuki was let free by the villain. The youngster was nearly out of breath, but at least the explosions stopped and he was unharmed. The sludge tried to hit Izuku, but he escaped successfully. Despite the fear of exhaustion, Izuku persisted in his efforts to incapacitate the villain by utilizing both hands. Smash! He was thrown to the ground by a tremendous blast of wind. It didn't matter that Izuku lost contact with the sludge. All Might finished the fight with a single blow. Izuku collapsed on the ground, gasping for air. Heroes stepped in, putting out flames and cleaning up the mess. After a few minutes, the heroes commended Katsuki on his explosive quirk, even if it had nearly killed him and had the potential to cause destruction. All Might ignored Izuku and posed for the press. It was the ideal time for him to leave quietly. Hey, you! Exclaimed Kamui Wood. You could have become a second hostage, or worse, gotten yourself killed. Do you realize how much harder you make our jobs? You could even get arrested for this. The hero chided him. Izuku saw that cameras were pointed at him, prepared to record any hint of his shame. Izuku ignored the hero and carried on walking. Mount Lady blocked his way, saying, "Don't ignore us, you brat." Instead, all he wanted to do was go home and fall asleep. He was lucky that his experience with the muck had not ruined his dinner. The hero tried to seize his wrist and blocked his way. Izuku went into a panic, worried about what he may do if he lost control. Don't touch me. He had to get out now since he was the center of attention. Katsuki said, "Don't mind him. He's just another quirkless freak." He was saved by Izuku, but this was his way of repaying him, more suffering. The heroes remained silent, not even to chastise Katsuki. Their response to his remarks was one of tacit agreement, and they said nothing. A few started snickering, which quickly turned into laughs. Even though the situation was completely incorrect, Izuku continued to smile as he took one last look at All Might, the symbol of peace. The less traveled paths leading to Izuku's house were bathed in a warm, golden glow as the sun began to set. Finally, the day was coming to an end. Izuku paused, utilizing his quirk to detect the presence of others. Since everything was silent, he gave himself permission to be vulnerable for a time and started crying. His hands had been tingling ever since he left the site of the devastation, so the release felt therapeutic. He allowed himself this moment of vulnerability and made no sound. But he was resolved not to publicly display his weakness. Too many times at Aldera he had found himself in such circumstances. Not anymore, he decided, simply said, "No more." Izuku was startled by a sudden clap of hands behind him. How could he not have felt them? In an attempt to conceal the fact that he was crying, he hastily wiped his face with his arm. However, his crimson eyes will eventually turn on him. Once more, it was the villain wearing the black helmet. Izuku was unable to sense their aura this time. They said, "I am very impressed," in a sincere manner. Izuku's voice faltered as he asked, I would prefer to be alone for now. See, could you give me some space?" You want to go home and lock yourself in a room, preferably soundproof, so you can get all this pain out of your head, the villain surmised, ignoring Izuku's request. I get the feeling. But if a small part of you wants to talk, just know that I'm here. I don't even know who you are, Izuku said, increasing his annoyance, and I don't want to talk, especially not to you. You possess a fantastic quirk, the ability to take and, if I'm correct, to give quirks. You could potentially be even stronger than All Might. Yet, here you are, subjecting yourself to the treatment society reserves for those who weren't blessed with a quirk. Why? The antagonist continued to approach Izuku. You could achieve so much more. You don't know anything. You don't know how it feels. I can sense it. Your quirk is monstrously strong. You're a fraud just as much as the heroes. You've never been weak, so don't pretend to understand how it feels. Izuku broke down in tears. But the villain did not back down and stayed unwavering. With the helmet covering their face, they stood still. But was there a mixture of disdain and sympathy in their quirk's reaction? I have been weak before, though it was a long time ago. Back then, heroes and villains were vastly different. Nowadays, it's easy for people to label others as frauds, just as you said. Call me a villain, a monster. I'll accept those labels as compliments. The antagonist raised their hand to Izuku. The red sparks flashing between the villain's fingers caused Izuku's eyes to widen. He felt guilty. Everything made sense at once. His suspicion was confirmed when he even imitated the villain's move. It seems that despite the uniqueness of our quirks, we share the same mutation. How many? Izuku inquired in a voice full of dread. Now he understood that his peculiarity was more empty than the villain's. As a wave of nausea hit him, Izuku turned away and said, "Thousands. I haven't kept count. Was there any empathy in this villain? Had they ever thought about what it might be like to lose a piece of oneself, something that made one unique? I can tell what you're thinking. Yes, I've forcibly taken quirks, but even now, some people wish to be freed from their villainous or parasitic quirks. I admire their courage for seeking me out, and I respect them even more for relinquishing a part of themselves." Izuku leaned against a wall and tried not to think about the villain's peculiarity too much. It doesn't make it right. Don't try to justify it. He felt sicker and sicker as he looked at them. Why should I? I made a choice to use my quirk in this manner. If hurting a few people along the way helps me achieve my goal, so be it. I already mentioned that I'm impressed, not by your reckless heroic intervention, though that was an impressive performance. No, what truly impresses me is how far you're willing to go for someone who, by all accounts, should have been left to die. He doesn't. Enough with the act. I recognize a bully when I see one. There's a history between you and him, isn't there? That wasn't pity in your eyes when you intervened. That was hope. You wanted to believe that saving him could change his behavior. You shielded yourself from the frustration of the heroes, but when he called you a quirkless freak, you froze. Izuku began to shiver with instantaneous regret. Just like that, the antagonist said, pointing to him. You can keep pretending it's okay, or you can take my offer. Share your story with me and find some relief. Izuku let out a long sigh and gave in. Do I even have a choice? The villain gestured to a bench nearby and said, You have the illusion of choice. It's better than nothing. Izuku took a seat, following the villain's example, saying, I can't stand seeing so much potential go to waste. Are you trying to turn me into a villain? Stubbornness is a flaw, but you're right to be cautious. I know you aspire to be a hero, and your determination is commendable. But it's clear that you haven't had much support in your life. What about your parents? My parents are aware of my quirk, and they're supporting me as much as they can. It's become easier to talk about bullying lately. You didn't want to involve them, or did you believe they wouldn't care? Izuku remembered his mother's worry before they found out about his peculiarity. He was officially quirkless at the time, so he couldn't hold it against her, and perhaps she was already aware of the bullying he had experienced. Even though he mostly utilized his quirk to get away from bullies and other uncomfortable situations, she appeared more assured of his ability to protect himself after he acquired it. Both, he acknowledged. Some people aren't equipped to be parents. I'm glad your parents took up their responsibilities. So, school it is. I've never been fond of schools. It's like sending children to public prisons, watching to see who will claw their way to the top. How old are you? Izuku was fascinated by such a quirk. If there had ever been an immortality quirk, it would have surely become well known. A few centuries, I suppose. I don't possess an immortality quirk, but my aging process has halted. If he had to speculate, it might not be a single talent but a confluence of peculiarities. So schools were just as unpleasant 200 years ago? The social dynamics haven't evolved much, although the educational system itself has improved. Take that Katsuki Bakugo, for instance, with his flashy quirk. Your teachers have nurtured quite an ego in him over the years. Reality will hit him hard eventually. He'll have to learn how to behave like a proper human being. After seeing Katsuki's actions while he was being held captive, Izuku had to concur. I can handle him, just like I can handle the others. The threats, the physical harassment, the taunts about suicide. The villain's tone changed to one of impatience and wrath. Excuse me? You should take a swan dive off the roof and hope you get a quirk in your next life, Izuku said. I should have recorded it. I don't want him hurt. Letting him get taken by the sludge villain wasn't justice, it was cowardice. But if the opportunity arises to reveal his true nature to the world, it's only fair. The antagonist sighed. And here I was about to offer my assistance in taking care of him. Youngsters and their morals. These people don't care about morals, do they? If the roles were reversed, he would have left you to perish in the grip of the slime. Izuku addressed the second portion by rejecting the villain's offer. But I didn't. It might not prove anything to anyone else, but to me, it shows that I'm better, and I'll always be better than he is. Fair enough. Is there something else? Based on your reaction, it's not just about him. What's truly troubling you? The villain leaned in and examined Izuku's actions as he tried to keep his resolution. That's where I shouldn't talk. Izuku attempted to reply, you've stumbled upon something you shouldn't have, haven't you? But his words got stuck in his throat. I'll take that as a yes. No need to mention the confidential aspect. Just tell me about the issue itself. Izuku fidgeted with his fingers and thought about explaining the encounter without mentioning All Might by name. I met a hero before the sludge villain attacked Katsuki. I asked them if it was possible to become a hero without a quirk. Obviously, they said it wasn't. But then I saw them again during the sludge villain attack, and instead of helping, they turned away. The bad guy laughed. Eventually, the giggles turned into uneasy laughter as the villain regained control. Oh, this is too good to be true. You met the blonde buffoon. You've seen him in his true form, haven't you? So All Might told you that you couldn't become a hero. And this fool reached his time limit in front of you, didn't he? How? How do you know about his time limit? Curiosity overcame Izuku's fear. Simple. I'm the one who brought him to that point. Spending time with this villain must have driven him insane. But his natural curiosity won out since he was drawn to every detail. He shattered my face. I'd show you what's beneath the mask, but it's not a pleasant sight. I've lost countless memories, and my body often feels numb. There's always a sense that something is missing. I want to see it. The antagonist let out a sigh. They carefully took off their helmet, exposing the wreckage of their brush with all might, and said, people are truly twisted these days. The place where their eyes and nose should have been was vacant. There was no blood or scar. They said sarcastically, what are you waiting for? A round of applause. He tried to kill you. Typically, All Might's acts were motivated by the desire to save lives. The exception was this villain. He certainly made the attempt. I allowed him to grow strong enough to defeat me. It's not something I can explain in the time we have. But All Might and his allies are willing to do whatever it takes to eliminate people like us, individuals with the all-for-one quirk. The name seemed appropriate but cliched. All-for-one? That's what you call your quirk? I came up with, hijack, it sounds less evil. Well, I named myself after my quirk. All-for-one, that's how people used to refer to me. Now I'm reduced to urban legends and, what do they call it these days? Creepypasta? I'm the boogeyman of quirks, and I feel like a clown. Izuku was just snorting. What's so amusing? Izuku was overcome with euphoria and drowsiness. Nothing, really. It's just, I imagined you with white paint on your face and thought you might be less intimidating that way. I shouldn't be laughing like this. The villain didn't truly mean it until he noticed the odd behavior of the youngster seated next to him. People often collapse under the weight, feeling unwell. I'm feeling drowsy. You've used your quirk too much compared to other days? Too much. Izuku fell to the side of the bench as his consciousness dwindled. After considering his choices, All-for-One decided to phone Kurogiri. Quirk exhaustion, wonderful. I hate dealing with kids. Without delay, his own warp gate reacted and appeared beside him. As soon as he saw the youngster dozing on the seat, the mist villain asked, my lord, what's the emergency? All-for-One quickly gave Kurogiri Izuku's possessions. He's most likely got an address or an emergency contact in there. I can't decipher it myself, so I need you to find out who he is and hopefully transport him back home. I have to clean up our former associate's mess before I return to the base. Kurogiri leaned over Izuku and said, "What happened to the boy?" To look for any wounds. He overexerted himself with his quirk, but apart from that, he's fine. Just weighed down by his thoughts. Let his parents know he needs a few days of rest when he gets home. Kurogiri gave a nod. I'll take care of it, my lord. Tamura has been concerned about you. We heard All Might was in the vicinity. The master villain then left, leaving Kurogiri to follow his orders. All Might. He's reaching his limits. Let Tamura know he doesn't need to worry about me. He should focus on himself. I'll be back very soon. He started by going through Izuku's possessions, which he considered disgusting yet essential. He discovered a piece of paper with a family name, address, and phone number in a pocket on the side of the school bag. Kurogiri muttered, Midoriya, to himself. The name was familiar to him. He realized that he was in a dangerous predicament. By now, Izuku ought to have returned home. There was definitely a problem. This was the latest he ever stayed out. He wasn't picking up his phone when Inko was attempting to reach him. She tried to call him 3 times now, and each time it went straight to voicemail. She was about to call the police since she was starting to feel panic when her phone rang. Inko, she said tensely, desperate to hear from her son, even though the number on the screen was unknown. Inko. The familiar voice on the other end was somewhat warped by the phone. She recognized the voice right away. Inko started, her voice shaking with a mix of panic and annoyance. Kurogiri, this really isn't the time. My son is. He is currently with me. He is sleeping because of quirk fatigue, Kurogiri interrupted in a cool, collected voice. Inko felt relief mixed with fear. However, she was still unable to get rid of the unease that had taken hold. The idea of her kid coming into contact with such a deadly person was extremely unnerving, especially since All for One had been seen in the area. However, it was possible that Kurogiri, as an independent being, had just happened to run into Izuku without the help of his master. Inko's voice faltered as she asked, Did All for One come into contact with my son? Master asked me to send your son home, but I don't think he knows what's going on, Kurogiri clarified, his voice a mixture of bewilderment and doubt. I have an address. Please come quickly, we need to talk. Inko's heart pounded. Her thoughts were racing with anxiety and fear. After thanking Kurogiri, she quickly wrote down the location he gave her. A plethora of ideas rushed through her head as she hung up. She had to reach her son to ensure his safety and to learn the reasons behind his initial involvement with Kurogiri. This is how Kurogiri, the most dependable disciple of All for One, ended up having tea with Inko Midoriya. Kurogiri had been suspicious of Inko because of her connection to Shigaraki, even though she had previously collaborated with All for One. But after a number of encounters, they had gradually come to understand one another and even become friends. Kurogiri's condition and the events leading up to his transformation into a Nomu were known to Inko. Despite his changed form, she saw his humanity and saw him as more than a mindless creature. Kurogiri's first query concerned Inko's son. You didn't mention having a son. You didn't tell Master. You didn't tell anyone. Inko clarified, I cut all contacts with Shigaraki to never involve Izuku, but clearly, it wasn't enough. I do not blame you or him. It just happened at a time I couldn't avoid it. Kurogiri continued, then Master doesn't know he is your son, but he knows you have one. He will figure it out eventually. His quirk. You told me about it. Does it mean you and Master had an extended relationship? I never thought he would allow himself to. Well, I do not mean to be rude. Inko surveyed the flat, a place she had shaped into her own. There isn't any picture of Midoriya Hisashi because he simply doesn't exist. I made up everything. The money, the husband who works overseas, the father who left a potentially quirkless kid behind him. Truth is, I did love Shigaraki at some point, and I still have feelings for him. Kurogiri's quiet said more than words could. For Inko, it meant that Shigaraki's feelings were validated. It was on the day of my retirement. We had a few drinks, got into trouble, and ended the night in the same room. You do not need the specifics. When I found out I was pregnant, I thought to myself that Shigaraki wouldn't be able to deal with a child. But I couldn't bring myself to end it myself. So I had Izuku. She went on to describe Izuku's early years and how, while he was sleeping, he had brought All for One's quirk to life. She talked about how he worked on managing his peculiarity and his desire to enroll in a hero school so he wouldn't have to conceal his actual skills. Kurogiri paid close attention, immersed in Inko's story. You put me in a difficult situation. You are the person my lord trusts the most. Yet you have been lying to him for 14 years. Inko's eyes sharpened as they locked with Kurogiri's. If I'm correct, All for One was defeated by All Might, and his empire collapsed on itself. If I had told him about Izuku, what tells me the symbol of peace or worse, the HPSC's goons would not have shown up at our doorstep the moment they found out the one and only All for One had a descendant with exactly the same quirk? Kurogiri turned away, realizing how serious the situation was. You were correct. It was a terrible period for us. All things considered, you only meant to protect Izuku. As Inko thought of her kid, her eyes grew softer. He wants to become a hero. I wish for him to accomplish his goal. That is something I never had the strength to do. Given my heritage, I was foolish back then to think I could take on the entire world all by myself. That's a big dream. I have flashes of memories, of my time at this place. I feel regrets. You never told Master about my dysfunctions, why? Kurogiri pondered, his voice brimming with memories. Under the swirling mist, Inko's hand extended to touch Kurogiri's wrist, saying, I thought he needed someone genuinely honest by his side, not brainless puppets. You are more human than most of his followers, Kurogiri. I don't think you are dysfunctional. And even if he knew about these flashbacks, I don't think he would be bothered. Something inside him seemed to be stirred by the contact. I won't tell Shigaraki, Master. I won't tell Tamura either. I promise. And if your son ever finds himself in a difficult situation, you can count on me, said Kurogiri. Inko smiled sincerely at him. Thank you, Kurogiri. Consider this the favor you owed me. Shigaraki will figure out Izuku is my son sooner or later anyway. When he does, I will face him. Kurogiri got to his feet, bowed, and walked away. He has forgotten a lot because of his injury, but he never forgot about you, Inko. Inko looked at her sleeping kid as Kurogiri disappeared as the mist engulfed him. Izuku lay quietly there, becoming more and more like his father every day. She believed that he would have a promising future and make a difference in the world that All for One could never. She envisioned a time when they would truly be a family, but she was aware that change in the world was necessary first. Izuku's thinking was still foggy from sleep when he woke up in his room. The recollections of what had happened the day before were almost dreamlike. He checked the time on his alarm clock and rubbed his eyes. 9 a.m. He let out a sigh. It was a Saturday. He was able to sleep in. He dressed and headed to the bathroom, deciding to take it slow. His mother was already up and watching the news when he walked into the living room. He yawned, still feeling sleepy, and said, Hey, Mom. I'm sorry, I'm late for school. Do you mind if I don't go? It's not like it's going to change anything if I miss it today. Inko looked at her kid and said, Good morning, sweetheart. It's Saturday, don't you remember? With a tone of loving amusement. For a brief while, Izuku paused as her words were processed by his sleep-deprived brain. Saturday. It had to be Saturday. He scowled inwardly at his own lack of memory. He laughed uncomfortably and said, Oh, right, Saturday. I guess I really needed that sleep. His mother smiled and nodded. It's good to rest every now and then. And speaking of rest, you're on television, by the way. Izuku's eyes grew wide, and he rushed to the TV, almost tripping over his own feet. As he watched the news, which showed pictures of the sludge villain incident, his heart was pounding. The event, now referred to as the sludge villain incident, happened at 1732 this Friday. A villain which hasn't been identified yet by the authorities was being tracked down by multiple heroes. It has been determined that the villain's quirk allowed himself to hide inside bodies like a parasite. The victim, Katsuki Bakugo, was taken by surprise and used as a human shield. When Izuku saw the video of Katsuki being kept captive by the sludge villain, his heart fell. He recalled the despair and terror in Katsuki's eyes. However, the unknown figure that stepped in caught his attention. The hostage tried to defend himself with his explosion quirk, but it made it difficult for the pro-heroes present on the scene to intervene. Then suddenly, a young man that hasn't been identified yet crossed the danger zone and managed to distract the villain long enough to free Bakugo. Then out of nowhere, All Might appeared and defeated the villain. It was later reported that the unknown teenager who intervened was quirkless. Therefore, while putting his life in danger, his act couldn't be considered as vigilantism. They quietly left the scene before anyone could interview them. The symbol of peace declared. With her eyes fixed on her son, Inko grabbed the remote control and switched off the TV. You used your quirk, didn't you? Izuku nervously scratched the back of his head and shifted his feet. I just messed a bit with his quirk. I didn't steal it, I swear. Wouldn't want to look like a giant mass of goo. There was a mix of pride and love in his mother's expression. I think you did great. I can't judge your decision in the moment, but you succeeded. You saved Katsuki, even if he did not deserve to be saved. They didn't mention the insult he yelled at me right as I was leaving, but they summarized what happened, Izuku said. Inko leaned thoughtfully back on the couch. Oh, so he is behaving like a spoiled, egocentric brat until the end. Wish I could scold Mitsuki, but really, I don't have the strength to deal with her. Izuku laughed quietly, grateful for his mother's comprehension. I should tell you one more thing. I, he said, hesitating, his words catching in his throat. He felt as though he might be putting his mother in danger, even though he knew he should tell all for one. But before he could say another word, he was interrupted by the ringing of the apartment phone. Inko grabbed it up quickly and responded in a nervous voice. With wide eyes, Inko said, "Yes. Who is calling? Yes, this is the right number. Oh, you, why yes. Out of course," and gestured for Izuku to answer the phone. "This is Principal Nezu from UA. The Nez." Izuku paused, covering his mouth with his hands to stop himself. His heart pounding, he carefully took the phone from his mother's palm. Hello. Ah, Midoriya, I have been looking for you everywhere since I saw you on television. When I saw you were wearing the same uniform as Bakugo, I connected the dots and figured out your identity. It was hard to convince the staff at Aldera to send me the profile of their students, but I just had to mention I was from UA, and suddenly, they executed themselves with rare efficacy. Principal Nezu's tone was both thrilled and amused. But moving on, I have been impressed by your performance, and I would like to offer you a private interview with me. Do you happen to be available this weekend? This week? Why yes, of course. The principal made plans in a pleasant tone and then hung up. Perfect, then. Present yourself at the gates at whatever time you prefer. I will be waiting for you, is what they said. Nervous and excited at the same time, Izuku gazed at the phone he was holding. His mother was clearly looking forward to it. She asked, So, what did they say? Izuku's voice wavered with a mixture of shock and excitement as he said, I'm going to UA this weekend for a private interview. Are you sure you don't want to go tomorrow? You overused your quirk yesterday. It's Saturday, you could always just go tomorrow. He did say this weekend, not today. With a mixture of nerves and resolve, Izuku turned to face his mother. In reality, he felt a little queasy, but there were no headaches or physical symptoms of weakness, just worry. I feel better, I promise. And I feel like if I don't have the courage to go now, I might hesitate tomorrow. It's my chance. I have to seize it now. Don't get attacked on the way to UA, alright? And if you do, you have all the right to steal their quirk if needed. The police will understand as long as you're only trying to defend yourself. And please call me as soon as you're done. I want to know everything. Izuku nervously massaged the back of his skull. I will, I promise. I should go now. The prospect of what lay ahead weighed heavily on his shoulders as he made his way to UA. He had received an official invitation from none other than Nezu, a very intelligent man. Izuku questioned whether he was actually being offered a position in their heroic department or if this meeting was just for publicity. He realized he hadn't told his mother about All for One as soon as he arrived at the school premises. He decided to talk about it when he returned home. In front of him were the enormous gates, strengthened to resist the use of quirks. He said that he had forgotten to write down Nezu's phone number as he looked around for a doorbell or intercom. He was ready to contact his mother to ask for help when the door suddenly swung back into the floor, showing Nezu, who was waving enthusiastically. Izuku Midoriya, you came on such short notice. I thought you might call me back to set the arrival time. Well, sorry, sir. I actually just thought about it and... No worries at all, I was getting a bit bored, and I truly enjoy using our security system. It's not spying, I swear, it's just observing what's happening around my home. Ha ha ha, please come in, let's head to my office, and I'll give you a short tour on the way. Nezu had already begun to move, his hyperactivity apparent. But sir, how? Nezu asked, turning around while keeping his smile intact. How did you know I want to be a hero? I don't mean to jump to conclusions, but you did risk your life to save a fellow classmate despite the odds being stacked against you. Also, I may have looked into your school records a bit. You've consistently shown an interest in heroics until you were 12. After that, you became more reserved about your future. Did something change? Nezu continued to lead Izuku along. There are consequences when you express a desire to become a hero, but everyone believes you're quirkless, Izuku said. Bullying, I should have guessed. You don't need to worry. Bullying is something that should never be tolerated in my establishment. It seems you haven't been discouraged. Now, tell me about this hidden quirk. How did you said, believes you're quirkless, implying you do have a quirk, a power you aren't proud of. And no, it's not something that engenders trust. It's strong, and useful, but while using it, I might as well be quirkless, like Eraserhead. Oh, you're familiar with Shota. It's rare for people to take an interest in underground heroes. While his quirk isn't flashy and he fights like someone without a quirk, he evens the odds, doesn't he? But back to the topic, what is your quirk? The principal's look went from interest to surprise as he said, it's called I call it hijack. It allows me to interact with people's quirks. I can take people's quirks and keep them for myself if I want. But I can also give them back. I swear, I've never stolen anyone's quirk. I've practiced a bit with my mother, and we continue to when I feel the need to use it. The principal's astonishment gave way to curiosity as he turned to face Izuku directly. I can also hack people's quirks if I want. That's how I disabled the sludge villain, for instance. It's very exhausting, though. Additionally, I can sense and perceive people's quirks around me, like a sort of sonar. Izuku massaged the back of his head. That's about all I know about my quirk. Nezu smiled back, comfortingly. I understand why you might anticipate negative reactions. Your quirk is extremely powerful and unique. It's a precious gift in the hands of a good person. However, if it falls into the hands of a villain, it could become a nightmare. Izuku wished he had never met All for One. Why yes, that would be horrible. Your quirk itself isn't villainous, it could be a great asset to us. Do you have any idea how many villains can't be imprisoned safely due to the nature of their quirks? I don't want to take quirks. It feels wrong to remove a part of someone. If it's temporary, it's fine, but I wouldn't feel comfortable keeping a quirk in the long term. The longest I've held a quirk was a few hours at most, and it was only my mother's telekinesis quirk. You won't be compelled to do anything that makes you uncomfortable with your quirk, Midoriya. However, you should know your limits. If you have to take a quirk to save a life one day, I hope you'll be ready. If it's justified, I suppose it wouldn't hurt, Izuku said, considering that it contradicted his personal convictions. Izuku was surprised to find Nezu's workplace less intimidating than he had anticipated. There were a few couches, a wooden desk with a computer, and one document shelf, but what really caught the eye was the enormous tea service. Nezu essentially leapt onto a couch and motioned for Izuku to take a seat across from him. Ah, I love squishy things. It's really comfy, I agree. I'll get straight to the point. I'd like you to take the recommendation exam under my endorsement. This is a unique opportunity for you. It's not easier than the regular entrance exam, but with your quirk, it'd be more fitting to showcase your talents. I've never heard of the recommendation exam. How does it work? Oh, it's not difficult at all. Occasionally, a pro hero identifies talented individuals and suggests their profiles. We then offer these young people the chance to join our program by taking a simple exam, scheduled before the regular entrance exam. I see, but what do you mean by more appropriate? Couldn't I demonstrate my quirk during the regular entrance exam? For a moment, Nezu cocked his head, thinking deeply. The entrance exam revolves around battling training robots in a mock city. A panel of judges, mostly pro heroes, evaluates the examinees' skills based on specific criteria. I can't go into more detail, unfortunately. I see. So, there's no disadvantage depending on one's quirk type. The major thought for a while. The reality is, we can't customize the exam for each applicant's quirk. The goal is also to simulate a real hero intervention. Izuku saw the direction this was taking. So, you're essentially eliminating chances for people with unconventional quirks. You can't expect us to. I'm not asking you to change the exam. I don't mean to be disrespectful, but quirkless individuals can't become heroes because of people like you, people like All Might, who set and maintain standards that exclude certain quirk types. Izuku's anger was unrestrained. I understand that not everyone is born with the same advantages, but if you took the time to see what people can do, it could change everything. Nezu looked surprised. Izuku briefly feared he had overreached himself, but he was also a little glad that the principal's attitude had softened. You're not afraid to speak your mind, to confront our shortcomings. Fine, you've convinced me. I'll revise the selection process to level the playing field. I assume you won't be taking the recommendation exam, then. Izuku laughed, experiencing a sense of both duty and empowerment. I've come this far on my own. All my accomplishments are based on my efforts. I won't take anything for granted, he reiterated. Nezu's nose twitched briefly as she said, "Great. Now all you have to do is not let me down, and the other judges, of course. Speaking of which, why did you mention All Might specifically and not another hero?" Izuku remembered the incident on the rooftop and felt a wave of nausea. I met him just minutes before the sludge villain attacked Bakugo. I asked him if I could become a hero without a quirk. I thought he'd be different from people at school, the bullies, the teachers who only care about their own fame and interests. But he outright said, no, and left immediately. The principal appeared surprised, but considering Izuku's openness, he had no right to accuse the teenager of lying. Yagi said, "What an insensitive response. He should be ashamed, and he probably didn't consider your emotional state before answering. It could have been far worse. However, you proved him wrong right afterward. The irony. I used my quirk a bit. Without it, I might have been able to distract the villain a little. No one could have single-handedly handled the sludge, but defeating it wasn't the point. Bakugo was in danger, and my priority was to free him." Izuku stated in a voice that was passionate. "I might have been taken hostage as well, in the worst-case scenario. Nobody knew what the best course of action was. Was it better to wait? Was it better to take action, even if it worsened the situation? I can't conceive of any outcome other than the one where you saved Bakugo. Why? Because you took action, and it turned out that way. Don't harbor regrets, and don't dwell on what they said." The principal looked out the window of his office. "Oh dear, it's getting late. You should head home. If you have further questions, feel free to contact me. Until then, focus on your studies and prepare for the entrance exam." "I will, sir." Izuku returned home about an hour later and told his mother about his in-depth conversation with the principal. This was his opportunity to discuss the aspect of his meeting with All Might that had not been reported by the media, Katsuki's offensive remark. "That's at least behind us now." He thought about saying, "all for one," again, but changed his mind. It seemed as though he was moving on and it no longer mattered. During supper, Inko reassured him, "Is everything all right, dear? If you need to talk, I'm here." Izuku chose to tell a half-truth because he was a horrible liar. I'm fine, just a bit overwhelmed by everything that happened. If I did need your help with something, I'd tell you, I promise." His mother kissed his forehead tenderly after clearing his plate. Despite his assurances, she persisted, saying, "I trust you, Izuku. If there's something you don't want to tell me, I understand. I'll always be here if you need to talk." Was he really that awful at poker? She wasn't asking questions, at least. Getting out of the UA left a really favorable effect on him. But he continued to think about his decision. There was no assurance that Nezu would actually alter the test. Izuku had to be practical. His quirk was perfect for interacting with humans, but as far as he was aware, machines didn't have quirks. One of his grievances was his lack of physical strength. On the other hand, he had an excellent academic record, so he shouldn't have any trouble answering the written exam questions. However, he lacked practical experience despite having theoretical knowledge about his quirk. His mind was filled with unsettling notions. Just to admit how terrible things were, he made himself think about them. Desperation pushed him into his bedroom, where he dug deeper into quirk analysis in an attempt to block off his thoughts. However, he was unable to stifle his hunger for very long despite his cerebral endeavors. How had the antagonist, no, All for One, mentioned his peculiarity? He didn't want to give his own power such a negative connotation. The point wasn't that. Although hijack had a more amiable sound, it nevertheless subtly implied theft. If the villain didn't have copyright on the name, he could be able to call his quirk All for One. Why was copyright for a villain's name a concern for him? Izuku accidentally used his quirk because he was so frustrated. He gazed at the crimson vigor circling his fingertips. This was a peculiarity he had to learn. He may become a legendary hero with such power. However, he couldn't expect someone to spend hours each day giving and receiving oddities. He needed the villain to help him. Surely it couldn't be against the law. He was merely looking for direction and counsel, a few hints and recommendations, and he wasn't breaking any laws. Izuku found it difficult. He searched the internet non-stop, but nothing could point him in the direction of the elusive All for One. He attempted, but kept being taken to strange sections of a French book about knights fighting a cardinal. Strangely enough, he was drawn to the synopsis and ultimately purchased the book. Having failed miserably to find All for One on the internet, Izuku thought of another tactic. He told his mother that he was going to take a long walk outside. She did not object to the concept, but her suspicion persisted, and Izuku became nervous. He was telling the truth. He really intended to go out and use his quirk to detect any sign of All for One. It wasn't like his town was full of people with all kinds of peculiarities, after all. His hypothesis was straightforward. For some reason, All for One had been in the area the day before while looking for the sludge villain. Izuku sensed that they had no peculiarity of conveyance, indicating that they were likely to have stayed close. Hopefully not in some secret underground hideout. Izuku had previously used his quirk to avoid some people, thus walking around the city became a productive exercise. He was moving from avoiding to finding now. At last he sensed something, faint, inactive, and hopelessly underground. Why weren't villains able to choose opulent skyscraper hideouts rather than the conventional underground bases? Such clichés. Given that the hiding place was in a densely crowded urban location, Izuku wondered if they had a peculiarity that allowed them to remain undetected. He remembered hearing about a famous European burglar who had possessed such a peculiarity. Though not for stealing, he would also like such capability. The feeling was near. After downing an alley, Izuku saw a staircase leading to a basement under a moderately large house. Determinedly, he moved downhill. A part of him hoped it was all a coincidence, but All for One's unmistakable closeness remained. When he arrived at a door, it naturally refused to give way. He knocked. Then, once. No answer. Izuku sighed and realized he would have to find another way. At UA, he could constantly concentrate on improving his quirk, high school while also honing his physical skills. But as he started up the stairs, he was pulled back by something. How could he have missed the opening of the door? Or foresee the coming assault? With a thrust to the floor, the door closed and the basement fell into darkness. Izuku noticed the unusual neatness of the room as he scrambled to his feet. With a familiar voice, All for One said, "I assumed you'd exercise more caution," in a courteous manner. Izuku could also hear a faint, almost inaudible beeping in the unexpected silence. He looked around and saw the villain strapped to an unknown medical device. When Izuku said, You literally threw me in," she stumbled. "Unfortunately, the chance of an accidental onlooker finding my hiding place was too high," replied All for One, without the helmet in his outfit, looking noticeably untidy. "I apologize for the disorder. I hadn't anticipated your prompt arrival." Wait, what if I had been an innocent bystander? Do you assume I would have resorted to murder? A tip: disposing of a body poses more difficulties than a minor form of mental control. No corpses, no investigations. Disappearances, however, are an entirely different matter, the antagonist said, his words interrupted by a cough. His palm was stained with a red liquid that was probably blood. Izuku reached for a tissue out of concern, but All for One stopped him in his tracks. "There's no need. I'm adequately prepared for this." All for One led Izuku further into the hiding place and showed him a residence that included a living room, a basic kitchen, and a medical room. The room was decorated with a wall of screens, which made Izuku wonder how someone could see screens without eyes. There was no bedroom, suggesting that All for One slept in his medical chamber, which must have been an uncomfortable place to do so. All for One leaned against a wall after cleaning his hand and mouth. "Let me assure you, I'm not on my deathbed. This is merely a temporary state, until I find an individual capable of rectifying it, provided they cooperate. And if they don't, are you assuming I'd resort to murder? Let me enlighten you. Murder invites more complications than a simple manipulation. No bodies, no investigations. Though, it's true that vanished individuals often stir more trouble. But it's a reality. One must apply logic to circumstances rather than adhering to absolutes," All for One said, unintentionally quelling Izuku's desire to challenge his viewpoint. The villain went on to say, "However, I suggest you sit and make yourself comfortable," shifting from his argument to an angry worry. "May I offer you a refreshment? I must admit a preference for water or perhaps tea over soda." Izuku said, "Oh, thank you, I'm fine," and he took a seat and accepted the invitation. "I haven't had a visitor in a long time. Kurogiri is an exception, of course," All for One remarked out loud, his nostalgia cut short by self-awareness. "Pardon me if I'm prattling, it's a tendency I'm trying to curb. At times, I've intentionally murmured, or feigned curses, it's a quirk of mine. My helmet proves advantageous for concealing that." Izuku acknowledged. I don't mind. I tend to do that too, though it usually irritates people more than it frightens them, establishing a brief connection of familiarity. As soon as All for One realized Izuku was uncomfortable, they changed the topic. I watched television yesterday. You've garnered significant publicity. With that, entering the hero school of your choice, UA, I presume, seems well within reach. Yes, UA is my goal. Interestingly, Principal Nezu reached out to me for a special interview following my media exposure. He even offered to advocate for my enrollment through the recommendation exam, but I declined. All for One rephrased, recognizing Izuku's contempt for the principal's rodent-like analogy, the rat proposed an interview. So, you relinquished the chance to participate in a recommendation exam that was practically served on a silver platter. An expedited route into Hero Academia. What's the point if it's easy? Sure, I'd get in, but I wouldn't be as strong as if I'd dedicated effort to preparation, Izuku argued. All for One acknowledged Izuku's viewpoint with a nod. Then, what's your current plan? Izuku acknowledged. I'm still mulling over that, the oblique question lingering. All for One arched a curious brow. Are you perhaps considering asking me for advice regarding your quirk? He couldn't afford to be uncomfortable in front of All for One, so Izuku's urge to touch the back of his head was suppressed. Yes. The villain's body shifted a little. You're requesting my assistance with your quirk. Izuku resisted the need to show weakness and answered, yes. There was another cough of All for One's, but this time there was no blood. I don't know how much aid I can provide. My strength has diminished since my prime. If you're looking for practical insights, this endeavor could prove challenging. Even theoretical guidance would be invaluable. Izuku begged, his excitement inadvertently coming to light. The response was, very well, we can attempt this. Start by describing what you've discovered so far. All for One agreed without comment. Izuku thus described his experiences with his quirk, including his accomplishments, his recent discovery of All for One, and his development. Your sensory abilities are truly remarkable. They offer a dimension I've never personally encountered. Admittedly, my emphasis was on our quirk's interactive capacities. Given your familiarity with these aspects, let's proceed to the next phase. You've yet to steal a quirk, correct? Well, I borrowed my mother's quirk once, but I promptly returned it an hour later. I understand the mechanics, I just haven't practiced. All for One reached out to Izuku. Proceed. Excuse me. Don't be obstinate. I'm affording you the chance to train with two quirks, minor water generation and a modest fire quirk, All for One said. I can't accept your quirks. Now you're merely stubborn. Izuku started to respond. No, but All for One's palm pressed in, drawing the quirks to him. Izuku gave up and took the villain's hand, feeling goosebumps immediately. Fine, but don't try forcibly bestowing a quirk again, it's ethically wrong. If he had been a little less determined, he may have given in to sickness. As soon as All for One sensed Izuku's unease, they immediately pulled out. Hold on, breathe, how far did you delve? The sounds, he couldn't tell if they were voices or echoes, but they were unmistakable. This is insane. Nobody should have such power. Was it only me? No, certain quirks possess complexity beyond what's apparent. I've encountered sentient quirks before. The ease of acquisition depends on the owner's will to retain their quirk. The type of quirk factors in as well. Imitation quirks are immune to appropriation, and even if you could seize them, the process would likely prove fatal, explained All for One. The echoes are something you learn to disregard. Do you still wish to proceed? Yes, let's try again. The second encounter went more easily. Since Izuku was not familiar with the procedure, All for One made the first touch. Two peculiarities were passed on. The ability to manipulate fire and water. Even though it was simple, it was like using a hammer for things that needed a screwdriver. This should come naturally. Avoid overthinking the application of your quirk. Just utilize it. Izuku eventually understood the idea. Blending the peculiarities was the next phase, according to All for One. Izuku merged the two abilities, comparing them to overlapping sheets of transparent blue and red plastic that produce purple. It produced a compressed rush of steam instead of fire or water. They're not permanently merged, right? No, our quirk's flexibility surpasses your expectations. You've produced steam, yet with adjustments, you could yield boiling water or similar effects. The key lies in maintaining logical cohesion. It does feel more challenging. It consumes more energy, doesn't it? Excellent observation. Achieving equilibrium between mental and physical energy is crucial. Loss of control during quirk fusion can lead to disastrous consequences, explained All for One. For almost 2 hours, they engaged in conversations and exercises, interspersed with deliberate pauses and nuanced body language that tailored their attention. Izuku realized it was becoming late when he started to notice the light waning. I should probably start heading home, and don't worry, I won't reveal anything about this place. You're not planning to brainwash me, are you? The answer from All for One was mild and devoid of any hint of evil. No need to fear, your honesty precludes any betrayal. But before you leave, if you don't mind sharing, what's your name? Izuku's lips were pulled by a reserved smile. I probably shouldn't give you my name. But you know mine, All for One shot back, his expression full of interest. The words, I know your villain alias. Knowing your real name wouldn't, faded out of Izuku's voice as All for One revealed something unexpected. Shigaraki. The phrases lingered in the air, and Izuku was briefly surprised. Shigaraki is my true name. If you're contemplating sharing your name, it's only fair that you're acquainted with mine. Izuku struggled inside, caught between his impulses and his developing relationship with the mysterious person in front of him. He acknowledged, I still probably shouldn't tell you my name, but his determination appeared to falter. All for One continued, gently prodding. Or perhaps your hero name. Surely you've given it some thought. After all, you've been more focused on others' potential than your own. Half of your life pondering what you could become, and the other half wondering what you could take from others. Izuku admitted within that All for One was right in his judgment, but his voice faltered a little as he disclosed his own nickname. You can call me Deku. The first answer from All for One was a scoff, a sound that reverberated with a hint of laughter. Deku, an intriguing choice. It's what the bullies used to call me, Izuku said quietly, his voice carrying the reverberation of painful memories. It means, useless. As the villain thought about the ramifications, his viewpoint changed. And won't it be a splendid twist when you rise as a formidable hero, casting aside that very name? Izuku was getting ready to go as he carried his backpack. Thank you for the assistance. It's strange, but I really needed someone to talk to. A hint of warmth, while skillfully concealed, was evident in All for One's response. It has been an interesting conversation. Go back home safely. Refrain from any further entanglements with villains until you secure your place in UA. Izuku acknowledged with a nod, his face displaying a mix of thankfulness and renewed resolve. And with that, he left. When Izuku arrived home on time, his mother noticed a shift in his behavior. His dedication was evident, and his mood appeared to have improved. Inko, intrigued by her son's extended absence, said, Where have you been? He let out a gentle sigh, clearly satisfied, his posture even appeared more straight. Oh, I was just out and about in the town. It felt strangely fulfilling. Just walking around, you know. Not constantly dwelling on Aldera. And, well, I'm going to get into UA, no matter what. Inko watched her kid intently, wondering if his behavior would confirm her fears. Izuku said, smiling softly, I'm glad you had a good day. I'll let you know when dinner's ready. He then retired to his room, likely lost in his never-ending quirk analysis. Inko took advantage of the moment and contacted her new confidant. Kurogiri, she asked in a forceful tone, demanding attention right away. Kurogiri's professional tone came through as he asked, responding, Is there an emergency? With a hint of conviction in her voice, Inko asked, Perhaps. Did my son have another encounter with Shigaraki? As if she was already fully aware of the circumstances. You mean All for One. I did receive a message from our master, instructing me to procure books on quirk counseling and what he termed, teenagers, moods. Whether these are related to your son or intended for Tamura is unclear, Kurogiri said. Now I'm sure they met again. Find out if Shigaraki went up to Izuku on purpose or by accident. My son has no direct way to get in touch with him, and I've made sure my history is safely hidden in the house, Inko revealed, her confusion over the unexpected resurgence of their relationship deepening. I cannot overtly inquire about their interactions without raising suspicion, but I'll remain vigilant, replied the bartender. As Inko was about to hang up, her mind turned to her nephew. Then let's hope their egos prompt them to share their exploits soon. I know Shigaraki. If he's as content as my son is, he'll be unable to resist boasting. She found herself changing the subject, seeing it as a perfect chance to inquire about her nephew's health. How is Tenko? She said. Kurogiri's tone had a hint of slight astonishment. Oh, Master informed you. Inko asked, her mother concern evident. When a relative's family disappears without a trace, one tends to seek answers from the devil himself. How is he coping? I'd like to hear your perspective. Tamura has developed an infatuation with All for One, though it's a destructive fascination. Nonetheless, it seems to inspire him in a twisted way. As for Tenko, he's grappling with his place in the world. Motivation to seek out his purpose eludes him. Inko's voice faltered a little in concern. Please tell me he hasn't developed a split personality. No, you misunderstand. Tenko and Tamura are one and the same, of course. I meant to differentiate between the villain Tamura and the young man grappling with his identity. Their brilliance is evident, but it's not solely about their family's fate, it's also about what their family did to him. I suppose it's up to you whether you've chosen to visit him yet. Inko struggled with a slight sense of regret over her choice. He might not take it well. My intrusion could do more harm than good. Perhaps he's better off without his family disrupting his life. What do you think? Kurogiri ended the call, his duties taking him elsewhere, saying, I won't contradict your choices. On that note, Tamura is returning, and I must attend to that. Goodbye. Now that the discussion was over, Inko was reassured that, to some degree, everyone seemed to be on the same page. Tamura said, Welcome back, in a tone that was a combination of detached and quiet angst. A faint air of indifference shrouded him as he and his partner made their way back to the pub. Your peculiar butter is missing, but aside from that, our errand is mostly accomplished. The bags thumped to the bar counter, and Kurogiri would soon be evaluating their contents. Kurogiri started to say, No worries, we still have some on hand, but was interrupted when two more bags were placed in front of him. Tamura's comrade Dabi, whose favorite nickname was now Dabi, said, Apologies, mine are a bit hefty, putting Tuya Todoroki's persona in the background. There was a quiet, friendly vexation in his nonchalant manner. It felt to Kurogiri like hands sliding into the sack in front of him. The third member of the group in their modest establishment was Rei Todoroki, however she preferred to be called Rei Himura, similarly to her son's desire for independence. Through an inexplicable chain of events, Dabi had somehow persuaded Tamura to plan Rei's release from a facility that dealt in arcane matters related to heroes, accompanied by Kurogiri's tacit assent. The word, mental hospital, teetered on Kurogiri's mind, but his face remained stern, a secret disposal site for people considered undesirable by their former clients, her husband. With a mother warmth and a familial familiarity, Rei said, Ah. It's about time our fridge received its overdue replenishment. Perhaps a fish-centric meal tonight. With a wry undertone, Tamura said, as long as he stays out of the kitchen. He glanced sideways at Dabi, who landed angrily on a couch nearby. Do you have something against my culinary prowess? Dabi responded with a kind of light-hearted outrage. You'd reduce your mother to tears. You. Rei silenced any growing teasing, and Dabi's response died in his throat. Rei's statement, no wrestling inside the bar, boys, had more weight than a simple order. It was the echo of parental power gained from the upbringing of 4 children. While one youngster had given her up, another wrote her off as suffering from a fictitious illness, the third battled with painful scars, and the fourth now objected to not being allowed to use the privilege of punishing a friend. Even though Rei had no amorous intentions, her calming comments swerved towards Kurogiri, who was struggling with an odd mixture of agitated feelings. I'm grateful for your ability to maintain order. I wish I could muster more sternness. You'll get there. Shall I assist you? Rei asked with a sincerity that was tempered with recognition of Kurogiri's abilities. His expression alternated between that of an emotionless bartender and that of a guy swept up in something deeply significant. I'll be of aid, he stammered, jolted out of his reflective reverie as he began the task at hand, taking care of their guest, with Rei, both of them directing the special dynamics of their makeshift family. Thus, the weeks passed quickly. Unbeknownst to Inko, Izuku continued to make secret trips to All for One. Izuku learned and developed under the guidance of the first All for One holder by visiting the villain's lair every weekend. He was becoming a more self-assured person as a result of these private sessions, but with a great deal of secrecy. Even though she was not aware of these visits, Inko's uneasiness persisted. She could feel Izuku becoming more independent, and while she could understand his motivations, it still hurt her that her son felt the need to hide things from her. The company he was keeping only made her worries worse. But she secretly realized that this was the course she had taken to keep them safe. Shigaraki and Izuku were both unable to know the truth about their father. She could still hear the terrifying words of All for One. He couldn't be a father, not for Tenko, and definitely not for Izuku. Izuku's newly discovered confidence grew more apparent as the days went by. Although Inko wanted they could spend these times together as a family, the situation prevented that. She was left to rely on her son's discernment and hope that the path he was on would take him to the correct place. Under All for One's guidance, Kurogiri, a silent observer, painstakingly documented Izuku's development. The villain was quite interested in his newest apprentice and saw potential in him that went beyond appearances. Even though Izuku didn't want to be called an apprentice, the mentor-student relationship became closer. Unaware of Izuku's presence, Tenko continued to concentrate on his own path. In their common interests and passion with internet culture, he and Izuku were like-minded, but they had never met. Inko frequently wondered how they would have connected and whether their friendship might have been possible in a different setting. Kurogiri claimed that the two could not possibly agree on heroes or individual objectives. Izuku did exceptionally well in the field of education. He found that online learning worked well for him, and he was able to advance in his studies. After the mess they had made of his scores, his prior experiences at Aldera Academy only strengthened his resolve to succeed. But there was an odd turn of events when Nezu, the principal of UA, asked about Izuku's time at Aldera in high school. After Inko expressed her viewpoint, something became clear. Numerous employees of Aldera were detained because of their ties to the Meta Liberation Army, a questionable group. Inko's previous ties to All for One had inadvertently caused a chain reaction. Alongside the UA, as the admission exam approached, Izuku's attention changed. He received further intense training from All for One in a dedicated room inside the villain's lair. Izuku's ability to manipulate quirks was refined, and his development was clear. But the task was enormous, and All for One's training pushed him to the edge. Quite literally. All for One's cry pierced the air as they started their training again, demanding more of Izuku. Again, he said in a harsh, unyielding voice. Izuku fought to comply, and his gasping gasps filled the room. He gasped, I can't push more, his body barely able to support himself. His training was intense, and All for One never stopped teaching. The space exuded a sense of harmony between discipline and mentoring. The space had been turned into a makeshift training field by All for One's teaching methods, and there was an eerie vibe to the place. Its change from a normal hiding place to a chamber of challenge served as a clear reminder of how nasty their relationships were. There was a cost to Izuku's struggles against All for One's eccentricities. The risks he encountered were brought to light by his attempts to avoid burns, freezes, shocks, and acidic materials. He got closer to mastery with each dodge and move, but he was also getting closer to danger. All for One provided constant supervision during the testing. He counseled, "Stay focused this time," with a note of grudging appreciation in his voice. His advice was accompanied by a flurry of projectiles, which Izuku had to dodge while keeping his composure. Try to follow your quirk instead of your head. Izuku's training left scars on his body, but the villain had the ability to mend any minor wounds. He practiced feeling the energy of All for One's eccentricities with his eyes closed, catching their motions before they reached him. Although it required a great deal of mental focus, it gave him a degree of control and foresight. Izuku's resolve grew stronger as the gap between them shrank. He whispered, "Gotcha," and conjured the quirk of All for One into his hand. He tightened his hold, and the two quirk stealers began to struggle. Arcs of energy swirled around his palm, a striking illustration of the unseen conflict. Izuku could hear the voice of All for One encouraging him to keep going. Izuku's desire for power was evident, and his resolve was evident with every tug. The villain's exhortation, "Take it," reverberated, encouraging Izuku to put forth more effort. A final, frantic tug followed a crescendo of exertion. Izuku's breath caught as the energy of the quirk settled inside him, and his palms shone intensely. He was exhausted from the effort and gasped for air. "It's so hard," he said, showing his weakness. As he approached, All for One's expression changed and he made a rare gesture of acceptance. He said, "You have done well," with a hint of sincere appreciation in his voice. The recognition demonstrated Izuku's growth in spite of the obstacles in his way. All for One added, "I'm impressed," after assessing Izuku's condition. The villain's thoughtful tone matched his analysis. "Most likely due to the nature of my quirk, it's much harder for you to take something from me. I was resisting, I didn't put much effort, but I still struggled myself. And keep in mind, you did so without physical contact. Feeling the quirk he seized gradually disappear from his all for one, Izuku remarked, I can't hold on long enough to actually take the quirk or keep a remnant of it. It feels easier every week though. The capacity to absorb a quirk from a distance was one of their greatest discoveries. Anything that did not require direct touch was more taxing, but the potential was limitless. When they discovered that they couldn't replicate peculiarities, they were very duped. This information would have been too difficult to deal with, so they were glad they couldn't. Izuku felt a burst of readiness, his previous uneasiness replaced by a newfound confidence. All for one said, I think you are ready, with a sense of importance in his voice. Izuku's voice trembled with expectation as he said, ready. You mean, his expectations hanging in the balance. UA isn't going to recover from what hit them, All for one said, letting out a sly laugh. A hint of Izuku's upcoming influence on the Hero Academy was hinted at by the laughter, which was a mixture of malicious satisfaction and suspense. The lines between hero and villain were blurred when Izuku's and All for One's laughing blended together. It was evident that their friendship was ironic, reflecting the nuanced nature of their connection. Izuku started by saying, Nezu said he would change the way the exams work, turning the topic to the impending UA entrance examination. Nezu's foresight was evident in the interest generated by the revised exam structure. With a tone that suggested contempt for the prior exam framework, All for One's remark was dismissive, a mix of scorn and laughter. The rat should have done that years ago. Just pack a bunch of kids together and send them into the danger zone, see who is more efficient than the others without giving them any context to show what they can do. Izuku's argument brought to light the various difficulties they encountered as well as the core of heroism. Well, that seems to be the point. When you are on patrol you must be ready for anything. Of course, agreed All for One. His reflective tone highlighted the flaws in the previous method. However, consider this. The old entrance exam was focused on seeing who was more efficient at dealing with villains. They never considered natural disasters, terrorism, or even hostage situations. Izuku realized the shortcomings of the prior exam framework as he thought back on previous events. Among other incidents, the sludge villain incident demonstrated the shortcomings of concentrating only on combat skill. The villain's analysis was sharp and touched on the fundamental problems with the previous system. I'm almost certain you figured out the issue, All for One said. They are sorting the quirks that are more oriented for combat without considering other situations, he continued. His remarks struck a chord with the Katsuki event and the perils of ignoring non-combat situations. Their conversation raised a crucial query. What part does Izuku play in this complex environment? In which category do I fit? Izuku said, clearly unsure. I can do a bit of everything, but I do not feel like I have a specific domain to work with. And you should not. This profession has never been about neutralizing people who use their quirks illegally. It was created to ensure people with useful quirks are trained to use them and contribute to society in an organized way. All for One's response was decisive and reflected his view of heroism. Izuku questioned All for One's position because his curiosity allowed him to see past the distinction between heroism and villainy. I thought you were a villain. All for One said, I am. With a voice that was a mixture of conviction and regret from the past. With a note of remorse in their voice, they amended, but I did impact politics a lot. I wasn't about to stand idle and watch the world consume itself. I have had an empire to run. Izuku's reluctance to discuss All for One's past was made clear by his apology. Sorry for. Do not apologize, All for One interrupted. His warning was a sobering reminder of the risks that were ahead. You need to know about this, or else you might turn into a puppet of the HPSC. Izuku was clearly uneasy as the topic of corruption came up. His incredulity mirrored the seriousness of the disclosure. Corruption. That's disturbing. The answer from All for One served as a sobering reminder of the harsh facts. He said, you fight evil with evil, in a matter-of-fact tone. With a hint of resignation, he said, and in the end, it turns out it's easier to use the methods of the enemy rather than following morals. Their conversation changed when they were asked, ever heard of Lady Nagant? Izuku was obviously familiar with the name, but his comprehension was still somewhat restricted. I did. She didn't really become mad and tried to kill some civilians, did she? The answer provided by All for One shed light on the grim realities of heroism. They sent her to a secret prison called Tartarus, he revealed, regretting what he had spoken. The villain said, I should have saved her, I should have, with sincere worry in his voice. You are not really a bad person, All for One said bluntly, with a note of grudging admiration in his voice. Sure, you want to rule the world and, from your point of view, it sucks. You still feel compassion. Izuku's epiphany was greeted with a mixture of acceptance and reflection. All for One said, compassion is a weakness, reflecting his own experience. I'm just using her situation to my advantage. A former HPSC assassin willing to turn their coat and work with me for the sake of protection. It's just perfect. As their discussion came to an end, Izuku's evening intentions came to light. I should go now, Mom is making katsudon tonight. There was a little sense of camaraderie in All for One's response. Katsudon, if it's your favorite, you have good taste. You like that too, quite so. There was a tinge of nostalgia in All for One's confirmation. A few years back, me and an associate used to. Never mind that, yes, it is also one of my all-time favorites. The reference to an associate aroused Izuku's interest, but he did not pursue the matter. He asked with a hint of curiosity, you have favorites? Now that I listen more closely, you never mention your father, is he? All for One's tone changed, exposing a bit of his past. Izuku gave a direct answer that was tinted with understanding and resignation. Oh, no, he is alive, at least I think. He sends money from his work overseas, but he left when I was very young. I don't even remember seeing him once. I guess he couldn't burden himself with a quirkless kid. There was a hint of pity in All for One's words. I'm sorry to ask. Izuku said, it's fine, we manage without him, demonstrating his tenacity. He had a fire-breathing quirk according to my mom. Genetic is weird, right? I can understand how it manifested with hijack. But I definitely have no fire. Haha, I agree. Both of my parents were quirkless, and they ended up having two very quirked kids. The reflective tone of All for One evoked a sense of togetherness. The discovery aroused Izuku's interest. You have a brother. The tone of All for One suddenly changed to one of regret and sadness. His comments lingered heavy in the air, highlighting the intricacy of his past. I had one, yes. We disagreed on a few things, and it didn't end well. I hope I can fix my mistakes eventually. But that's a story for another day. As the time for Izuku's departure approached, their talk veered toward lighter topics. With a hint of humor, All for One said, run back to your house, young hero, or else your mother will end up calling the police if you are late. Izuku said, see you next week, sensei, in a tone that was both eager and excited. All for One gave himself a moment's rest after Izuku had left. He reminds me of you, Yoichi, just less delusional, he said to himself. Stretching and getting up from his chair, he thought about going to see Tamura and his friends. He pondered out loud, I should visit Tamura and his friends, revealing a hint of his hidden agenda. Hopefully, he is turning the safe house into some sort of rehabilitation center. Rei paused in the middle of the steady clinks of the knife against the cutting board, her eyes examining her palm with a vigor that came from exhaustion and annoyance. As she let her inner struggle out loud, the vegetables were forgotten. I've never pushed my quirk to such an extent before, sometimes I wish I had impaled Endeavor on a spike years ago. But I don't know where I could have taken the children. If I had known about All for One, I would have sought protection from him. With his measured words and the gentle scrape of steel, Kurogiri began working beside her with a sharpening stone. Your testimony against Enji Todoroki is invaluable. The same goes for your children's. Taking down the number 2 hero through legal means aligns perfectly with my master's plans. In the bar's kitchen, Rei and Kurogiri engaged in a silent dance of purpose and covert ambitions. There was a sense of anticipation as they got ready for an anticipated visitor who matched the particular kind Dabi had mentioned and who caught Tamura's attention. Curious, Rei asked, have you found the items they requested? It's an unusual dietary preference. I wasn't aware specialized stores existed for such conditions. Kurogiri's words and actions were in perfect synchronization as his hands moved with skill. It wasn't overly challenging. The cost is reasonable, but access to these specialized food banks requires authorization from a medical professional. Dabi mentioned this person has a distinct mindset, though I won't presume, but abusive parents, Rei said in a serious tone that made the dishes she was holding fall with a loud thump into the sink. It's a pattern that seems to have woven itself into the fabric of this family. We've developed a knack for recognizing when people are struggling. You're right, this is what Tamura seeks. It takes a certain detachment from sanity to kill for an idea or a dream. Kurogiri was correct in the long run, but Rei was prepared to dispute his assessment. Though her dreams had accumulated into a mound of remorse, she would have killed Enji without hesitation. Perhaps I should train as well. Rei went to get more meat, but Kurogiri's hand held her back. You're not a villain, Rei. Don't feel compelled to transform yourself for the sake of erasing your past. Rei put her hand against Kurogiri's wrist and felt his skin through the dense fog that surrounded him, saying, it's not about being a villain. Nor am I acting out of selfishness. I merely want to show my children that I'm not weak, that I can still fight back. Kurogiri shivered a little, his internal workings thrown off balance. He must not feel this. In an attempt to escape the intensity of their moment together, he said, the vegetables are close to overcooking, which caused Rei to let him go so he could save their dinner. Dabi and Tamura came into the kitchen at the same time. Tamura came into the room with a threatening air to his demeanor. I swear, you're suggesting she's another one of those Stain fanatics. Dabi, these people are unhinged. Darkly amused, Dabi shot back, says the guy who adorns himself with his dead father's hand as a mask. Rei approached slowly, trying to avoid a possible confrontation. What's the commotion, gentlemen? What's all the fuss about? Dinner's off the table. I won't be recruiting some Stain-worshipping zealot, the leader of the league said in a determined manner. Tamura's position was contested by Rei's equally firm answer. I'm sorry, but we won't be canceling dinner. Kurogiri and I have put hours into researching how to properly prepare a blood-based dish for her. Even if she doesn't join your cause. Tamura whispered, League of Villains, to himself. Regardless, whether she joins or not, I won't abandon her to the streets. She's either going to end up dead or become a murderer. This place isn't yours to control. Although Rei was smaller than Tamura, she didn't hesitate to assert herself, treating the young man as she would a rebellious child, a phase her biological children never experienced, and took pride in that. No, it isn't, but as far as I know, I'm still the one cooking your meals and keeping this place clean. No offense, Kurogiri, but I seem to be more efficient than you were. Tamura, who was neither a biological child nor old enough to be referred to as a child, harbored a mix of embarrassment and bitterness. But it was only natural for Rei to own his mistakes. Tamura could use some discipline. Kurogiri had previously kept the peace. I can't deny that, Kurogiri said, responding to Rei's remark regarding his prior duties prior to her rescue. All right, I'll give her a chance. Maybe she won't be as twisted as I anticipate, Tamura said with a dismissive click of his tongue. With his arms crossed, Dabi jokingly asked, You don't believe in coincidences, do you? While looking over what his mother had made for the evening. Now you're just being. As Tamura was ready to do something mildly irresponsible, the door of the bar flew open and slammed into the wall. A lively, feminine voice said, Hello. Suppressing his annoyance, Tamura groaned and walked out of the kitchen to look at the newcomer. His voice trailed off as he saw a teenage girl covered in blood, her tights stained scarlet, and a frighteningly huge knife. I'm about to commit murder, he said. Kurogiri, bring salt and anything that can clean up blood. Struggling to keep his Nomu composed manner, the bartender rushed to the door. Perhaps I should inform Sensei that this location is compromised. Unfazed, the girl laughed and said, No, the blood has already dried. I'm not stupid enough to leave a trail leading straight here. Are you Tamura? Dabi said to look for the skinny guy who's perpetually sulky or furious. You fit the description perfectly. What? With her blood-stained knife shining in the surrounding light, the girl walked over to Tamura and offered to shake hands. I'm Himiko Toga, but you can call me Himiko or Toga, whichever suits your fancy. Now, can I have a taste of your blood? No, absolutely not. Oh, dear, Rei said with concern as she came on the scene, looking at the dried blood splattered on the girl's clothing. She escorted their new, somewhat erratic visitor away with a compassionate hurry, saying, Poor thing. Let's clean you up. Let's head to the bathroom. Dabi sighed and added his own perspective. Seems she might have exaggerated the description a tad. I don't need to hear another round of sarcasm until tomorrow. Later that night, everyone was gathered around a table in the main area of the bar, with the exception of Kurogiri. The tears in Himiko's eyes were ascribed to a perceived spiciness as she relished the unusual blood-based dish that Rei had prepared. Tamura watched the mysterious girl with interest mixed with early judgments. Himiko's capacity for dishonesty was almost charming, a departure from their world of lying and manipulation. Tamura let the girl tell her story in her own words, deciding it was time to get to the point. So, Himiko, who or what did you stab before arriving here? Himiko paused, a darker recollection flashing across her head, her smile fading. She said, "Well, he, some guy was tailing me on my way here. He wanted to," as the comedy in her story faded. As she spoke, her tone quickly changed to one of laughter. "Just know he was up to no good. I politely warned him that if he continued bothering me, I'd remove whatever's between his legs. Then I had an idea. If he's going to harass every defenseless girl he finds, I might as well," she said. Everybody at the table interpreted the narrative in a different way. Tamura valued her straightforward strategy, addressing the root of her issues directly. Dabi appreciated her boldness and unconventionally bold demeanor. In a larger sense, the heroes and the police would now concentrate on the killer instead of possible victims. Proud but worried, Rei offered her sympathy. You did the right thing, but, did he do anything to you? Can I help in any way?" Hamiko said, "No worries, ma'am. Whoever he was, he's either incapable of fathering children or already well past his final moments, happily. Please, just call me Rei," Hamiko asked, jokingly pointing to Rei, Dabi, and Tamura in order. "Oh okay. So, thank you for the dinner, but I came here to be recruited. How does this work? We're playing good cop, angsty cop, and bad cop." With a look of exhausted amusement, Tamura added, "Just tell us about yourself, and don't hold back." Bad cop. Here took weeks to even talk about his own life. "There's no need to brag about my miserable existence, it's not like you spoke about your own either." Dabi sighed. "Regardless, I'm not interested in bringing in random NPCs. I'm searching for something real. So, what's your story?" Hamiko stared at the knife next to her, its shiny edge reminding her of her fixation. "This world's awful, life's tough. All I want is to make it easier. If I can be happy and smile, that's enough. It's just simpler from my perspective if everything's covered in red." Dabi asked, "And do you have a clear purpose, or are you just following your impulses?" With a hint of understanding mixed with curiosity, Hamiko tapped the hilt of the knife and thought, "When I genuinely like someone or something, I feel this irresistible urge to see them soaked in blood. There's something oddly captivating about it. Thus far, you seem all right. But let's get to the heart of the matter. What's your opinion on Stain?" "Stain." Hamiko's unrestrained, girlish laughter bubbled up. "He's an artist. His work is splashed in red, a chaotic masterpiece with every kill. Despite the gore, people still adore him. I want to be just like him. I want to make him bleed." Tamura struggled with his mind, torn between curiosity and fear. He was concerned by Hamiko's obsession with blood, but her lack of fervor for Stain suggested a different viewpoint. "Why are you asking? Do you hold a grudge against Stain?" Tamura scuffed, holding in his annoyance for a while as he responded to Rei's reprimand. His initial reaction was tinged with annoyance, but Rei's tempered tone carried a blend of sternness and concern, and he was unable to ignore the truth in her statement. "We're having a composed and professional dinner, so I'd appreciate it if you didn't have a meltdown in front of our guest. Act like a leader, please." He gave her a disgruntled look, but he knew in his heart that he was becoming agitated once more. As she gave her instructions, Rei's voice grew softer. "Apologies for getting carried away. I merely wanted to present my viewpoint. We have an objective here, and wanton slaughter for the sake of attention isn't part of our plan." Hamiko's smile vanished as the intensity of the conversation overtook it. She said, "You're strange. I like it," with a sincere warmth in her eyes. Tamura decided it was preferable to proceed without acknowledging her compliment. "Tell us about your quirk and how it functions." Tamura silently made up his decision as Hamiko openly discussed her skills. "Welcome aboard. You're in. You're cool, I guess." Hamiko's eyes glowed with joy. "I'm in," she shouted, getting up from her chair and triumphantly raising her blood-tinged knife. "Kurogiri will prepare a room for you, and..." Even though Hamiko seemed to be inconsistent, there was a glimmer of genuine worry in her comments. "Oh, well, I expected you to offer that. But, I need a place to stay for a few weeks, for a friend. Once I'm finished, I promise I'll move in." Tamura was fascinated and confused at the same time. Although her behavior suggested instability, her candor was admirable. "Sure, then, would you like to take some leftovers with you? It might not be wise to have another blood-stained incident mere meters away from the bar when you leave." He accepted the request with apprehension but willingness. "You're pretty cool, Tamura." It was one of the most lovely days of Hamiko's life. She was excited about the days ahead because she had met new friends, had a cool boss, had a hideout that spoke to her, and had the amazing cook, Rei. She realized that she and her best buddy were not exactly on the same page, but she still hoped she could tell them about her new professional route. She proclaimed her return and walked inside their shared apartment without knocking. She sang, "I'm Hami," with a voice full of enthusiasm. "And I brought dinner." "You did. Your interview must have gone well." Her friend's excited voice, clearly coming from the restroom, reverberated. Without any delay, Hamiko set the plates in order. In order to share the leftovers, Ray had carefully made extra, even isolating the special dish from the others. Ochako came out of the restroom, her hair still wet and wrapped in a towel. "Tell me everything." With a range of emotions flowing in her eyes, Hamiko smiled. Her statements were tinged with confusion, indicating her hesitancy regarding her interactions. "Oh, well, my boss is like some angsty nerd, but I don't know, it's strange. I don't feel the urge to see him drenched in blood. I don't hate him either. I think I like him, as a normal friend, maybe." In a sense, Ochako was a prime example of that same ambiguity. In a strange turn of events, Hamiko and Ochako had met and were now sharing the apartment and rent each month. Hamiko had earned a respectable sum of money from her unusual activities, and their paths crossed while she was looking for lodging. Hamiko appreciated Ochako's warmth and purity in spite of their differences. Unless it was someone else's blood, she didn't want to see Ochako covered in it. Ochako's altruism was the source of her desire to become a hero. Hamiko thought this objective was admirable, but she also thought it was a little naive. How could somebody prioritize the needs of others before their own? Like Hamiko, Ochako seems to be dealing with her own peculiarities. Ochako was able to get employment at a nearby market, where she helped replenish the exhibits. It wasn't much, but it went a long way toward paying her share of the rent and groceries. However, the contradiction in their goals presented a problem. Ochako was about to take the UA entrance exam, whereas Hamiko was headed for villainy high school, chasing her heroic aspirations. Their developing bond was clouded by the certainty of their separation. Hamiko was resolved to enjoy these times as long as possible. Ochako asked, a hint of worry in her voice, "Is he nice?" "Oh, he's nice. He even offered to bring the leftovers from our dinner. The others seem decent too. Actually, now that I think about it, I believe their mom lives in their base office." "How can you tell?" Ochako said doubtfully. She reprimanded him for not throwing a fit. Hamiko laughed. "No way," said Ochako incredulously. "Yes way," stressed Hamiko. As Ochako tasted Ray's dish, her face lit up with joy. From a humble upbringing, the taste's probably beyond her expectations. "I don't deserve this. Come on, Ocha, let's treat it as a celebration. I got a job, and you're going to UA soon." "Ah, yes, of course." Hamiko felt that Ochako was acting strangely. "What's going on, Ocha? You should be excited." Because Ochako's family had put so much money into her, she said, "It's a lot of pressure. I don't want to let anyone down." Hamiko wished she had been helped by her own family. Ochako was deserving of her affection and encouragement. "Hey, you're amazing. If you don't make it into UA, then they're just idiots. And if they don't let you in, I'll personally pay them a visit," signature knife in hand. Though she didn't think Hamiko could do that unless there was a really strong cause, Ochako forced a grin and turned down her offer. In an attempt to lighten the situation, she laughed and said, "No worries, I'm sure I'll get in. Because if I don't, I'll be the one who gets stabbed, right? I'd never do that. If I did, I'd use a needle. That way, I wouldn't lose a single precious drop of your sweet blood." "Of course you would, haha. But it's not healthy to consume blood that way. What if someone's sick? Does your quirk come with immunity?" Hamiko thought of the dead bird she had told. "Pretty sure I didn't even catch the flu from it." I know. But what I'm saying is you should see a doctor. You could get a prescription to buy blood from specialized distributors. It's not expensive with the right support. I looked it up." "Sure, but people would still look at me like." "Hamiko, please, promise me you'll never stop smiling when you want to. That's what I cherish most about you." "I won't, I promise. It's me, Sensei," Izuku said as he hurried into the basement and shut the door. The tea was ready, and the soda can was placed nicely on the kitchen table, as if All for One was looking forward to his coming. "I expect nothing less than perfection from you," All for One responded in his characteristically eloquent style. "Ah, it's the future greatest hero. You're overestimating my ambitions, Sensei. I can't even string two words together in front of strangers without stuttering." The terrible effect was lessened when All for One subtly used one of his aura quirks, but Izuku noticed. Minor setback, my boy. It's just the result of years of bullying. You can overcome it with practice. The point is, you need to impose your presence on others, especially villains. How else do you expect to maintain control over a situation? I don't have to be. Izuku paused in the middle of his statement and let out a frustrated sigh. 5 at the same time. Seriously, he asked, alluding to the various peculiarities of All for One. More than enough, the antagonist jokingly said. Izuku understood a little too late that his sarcasm was about to backfire when he said, I'm supposed to be a hero. I can't just show up and put on a scary or vicious facial expression, followed by a fact-filled speech about how villains should give up all hope of victory. The villain felt something stuck in his throat and then went to look for his helmet. See, ha ha ha, you're a natural. Give it a try later. Trust me, if your opponents fear you, they'll never be able to fight with all their strength. I swear I need a face mask rather than this thing. Does it have anything special? It looks like a regular helmet to me. He enumerated several attacks for a minute, saying, this is the only piece of armor I need. I can get poisoned, electrocuted, burned, frozen. Although I'm immune to most physical conditions, there is one thing that every hero and villain alike should fear: psychic quirks, reality-bending quirks. Those that do not seem to follow any kind of logic. You can explain a lot of quirks scientifically, but occasionally, you'll find anomalies. Izuku suggested, like, 13. Her quirk is literally a black hole, as an illustration. Not exactly. If she was a black hole, we would be in real trouble. But it's still a good example. These quirks that cannot be explained can bypass any kind of defense. You cannot protect yourself from them unless you know their rules. Although they do not follow the rules of the universe, they are bound to follow their own. Izuku concluded, brainwashing quirks, to the cheers of All for One. Excellent. Brainwashing quirks, a touchy subject. I haven't found many of these, and I'm not bothering to keep them myself. It's always a pain to figure out the right conditions to properly use them. Even then, it's still too situational. People with such quirks are often specialized in specific tasks, stated All for One. Izuku had to concur. For instance, how would you explain Eraserhead's ability to suppress their quirk simply by glancing at them? His status as an underground hero is understandable. The only thing left to do is to use the weaknesses to oppose his quirk after he has discovered it out. So, there are ways to counter most brainwashing quirks. Izuku thought. All for One rotated his head to show Izuku the sides of his helmet and said, yes, surprisingly, these quirks are easy to counter without having to go into specifics. It's always about protecting your senses. Sight, hearing, smell, and taste. The last two are rarer, though. See, electronic filters. It cancels most of the sound-based quirks that I might have to face. As for the mask itself, I'm completely blind without my sensory quirks. Otherwise, it acts as a regular gas mask, plus the medical support purpose it serves at the moment. Oh, I see, I have to. Izuku quickly pulled out his most recent sheet of analytical paper. I'm glad you're taking notes. I cannot read. What are you writing about? I can see it's not the first page. This is a notebook I use to analyze quirks. I'm writing about the function of your helmet for my costume. Izuku clarified. I can't go blind, though. Would it work if I asked for goggles or glasses that work as a one-way mirror? I wish I could see your costume designs, All for One remarked, directly behind Izuku. You wouldn't be immune to light-based brainwashing, but for quirks that require eye contact, it would be a great counter indeed. Oh, well, I will bring it over one day when it's actually crafted so you can see it. I used to have an old design in mind, but I had another idea recently. I still haven't figured out exactly what I want. You won't mind if I take some inspiration from you, right? Izuku was speechless. Izuku's irony was dismissed by All for One, who stated, of course not. A costume is always just some piece of clothing put together to protect yourself. It doesn't have to be an expression of who you wish to be. The villain resurrected the elephant in the room by saying, but moving on, the entrance exam is happening tomorrow. Do you feel excited? Terrified. It will happen one way or another, and I just don't know how I'll feel once it starts. I want to put on a smile and give everything I have. Still, it's hard. I prepared for this moment, and I feel ready. Izuku remarked with assurance as he closed his notebook. Not ready enough. You know how much I hate schools myself. Don't even talk to me about exams. The only advice I can give you is to not discourage the other contestants. Izuku was told by All for One. What? Stuck in their laughter, All for One was unable to continue, saying, do your best. But not too much. How would you feel if you ended up second, and the person ahead of you had twice the number of points you got? The look on your face is priceless. Izuku felt like crying. He was going to be successful, of course. When you can adjust to any circumstance, what could possibly go wrong? However, the young man would later that day reflect on this moment and chastise himself for being so unprepared for social situations. For the 6th time in the past 10 minutes, Inko asked, are you sure you have everything you need? With obvious anxiety, she was right to keep putting pressure on Izuku. He was often questioning whether he had forgotten something important to take in his rucksack. This time I'm certain I'm still forgetting something. Clothes, phone, water, snacks, books, pen, ID card. Am I just stressed? I'm sorry, Izuku. I guess it was too much this time. Inko's hesitancy was a result of her profound comprehension of the difficult path Izuku was taking. It felt more real now, even though she had always known how difficult it would be for him to become a hero. You should go now. The earlier you arrive, the faster you'll be able to get comfortable. You think so? Izuku couldn't help but think of his mother as a child. Of course, I went to school too, sweetie. Your mother knows just how hard it can be to fit in. No worries, though, you are cute. I'm sure you will be popular without even trying. She was amazing in too many ways, he had to concede. To be liked, she only needed to breathe. I don't really want any kind of exposition. He had endured the worst kind of overabundance of attention at Aldera. And a few months prior, he had placed himself in a dubious position of attention. However, it had guaranteed him a chance to take the entrance exam. It's not about getting attention, it's about having the right people on your side, Inko stated. Izuku tried to avoid a headache by leaning against the wall. For the universe's sake, no more Katsuki Bakugo. A hint of malice crept into Inko's sneer as he said, ignore him. He can't sabotage your exam. If he does, and UA doesn't take any action, I will pay a visit to Nezu. I can be very persuasive. Who are you, and what have you done to my mother? Laughed Izuku. Uncertain whether Izuku was doing it on purpose or not, Inko felt her quirk vibrate and gripped both of her shoulders. You can rely on me, Izuku. No matter what you choose, I will support you. Got it? Izuku gave his mother a hard embrace and said, thank you, Mom. Now, go. You want to arrive early, right? The UA, presided over by the agitated Principal Nezu, it was bustling with examinees and had a completely different atmosphere than when it was vacant. Yes, it was active, but it had a unique feel. Suki had been terrified of going back to Aldera just a few months ago, feeling as though she was entering hell. But UA, Hero Academia exuded a friendly hospitality. Izuku no longer had to worry about an attack at any time, and he no longer frightened those around him. He had followed his mother's advice and arrived an hour early. She was correct. He was more relaxed and at peace here. By his side, like a kind of security blanket, lay his analysis notebook. Being in a throng was less oppressive because of his training with All for One. His senses were stimulated, not dulled. The appetite had been momentarily stifled by practicing with other idiosyncrasies, although not quite. The start of the admission exam was imminent. Izuku saw Katsuki Bakugo, still as rude and angry as ever, shove past everybody who stood in his way as he made his way to the facility. Izuku was still a few meters distant and out of sight. Maybe Izuku's erstwhile bully had forgotten about his goals and something stopped his thoughts. Izuku's eyes moved from Katsuki to a brown-haired female. She had her back to the looming collision course with the explosive blonde, absorbed in her phone. Izuku would normally overlook such a situation, but he found himself weighing the evidence in favor of intervening because she was unprepared to block her fall and had her back turned while holding a delicate equipment. Katsuki roared, "Out of my way," and charged at the door. The girl lost her footing and yelled. She attempted to protect herself from a severe fall, but nothing happened. She was unable to descend because Izuku had grabbed her left arm. Unaware of his interference, Katsuki rushed forward. Izuku stammered, okay. Why yes, she answered, still clinging to Izuku's arm at an odd position. Do you mind? As Izuku quickly dragged her to her feet and let go of her arm, she said, oh, yes, so sorry. He sensed her peculiarity, A weight-related effect, triggered by touch, maybe. She asked, "Sorry, what did you say?" Which caused Izuku to realize he had spoken out loud. Izuku put his hand over his lips. His usual reaction when he was uncomfortable was to touch the back of his head. Mumbling, "Sorry, I was speaking about your quirk, but never mind that." He asked, "It would have been bad if you got hurt before the exam, right?" "Yeah, that jerk," she murmured, her eyes darting furiously to the doorway as though she were looking for her pusher. "That blonde guy. Anyway, thank you for the save. Your timing was great." It was nothing," Izuku said, trying to seem humble. The girl held out her hand as though to shake hands, saying, "No, really. I don't know what I would have done if I'd tripped in front of everyone. The shame, you know. I'm Ochako Uraraka." Izuku took her hand, shivering a little at the touch. It was intimidating to be in close proximity to someone who had a digital activation quirk. "I'm Izuku Midoriya. Are you all right?" Fine. Sorry. Izuku halted, as All for One had taught him, and inhaled deeply. "I'm stuttering a lot, it's the pressure. Otherwise, I'm fine." "Ha ha ha, I get it. Say, want to go in together? I don't want to have another encounter with that creep." You want to?" "Well, sure, let's go." Since he was 4 years old, Izuku had not made any friends. Even though they had only met 2 minutes prior, it had taken 10 years to build something approaching a normal and healthy relationship with another human being. Ochako appeared sincere, too kind, actually. Izuku wished he had her level of composure. Since they had been assigned to the same exam group, they might be able to help one another cope with the pressure. She inquired, "So, what's your quirk?" He chose to leave out the negative aspects of his quirk for the time being because it wasn't appropriate to express his disappointment. "My quirk. I haven't gotten it registered yet for personal reasons. I can absorb other people's quirks and use temporary versions of them. I haven't tested my limits, but I can use multiple quirks at the same time and mix their effects." "Wow, that's so cool. So, you can copy my quirk?" "I could. At this range, you would barely feel it. It only lasts for a few minutes, though. I can also see other people's quirks around me. It's like seeing their auras." Sorry, I meant, what does my quirk look like?" Izuku paused to examine Ochako closely. "Your quirk is a mix of purple, red, and pink. It feels soft and detached from everything, and I can see some kind of focus near your hands. I'm assuming it's related to weight." "How can you know that?" "That's incredible. My quirk allows me to remove the gravity of anything I touch. I can release it at will, but if I use it for too long, I get sick. I haven't practiced a lot. It's like running for a few hours and not stretching afterward. You wonder why everything hurts the next day." She laughed. Izuku had been rehearsing many scenarios in his thoughts for years. "I will keep that in mind. You aren't bothered if I use your quirk?" "I think most people would feel uncomfortable. When you told them that you could take away their identity, it was difficult to accept that people could be that sensible. I guess I would just shrug it off. It might be awkward, sure, but not to the point of being uncomfortable. What if I had a fire quirk? Like 20% of the population has a basic quirk, like fire." No offense intended when I'm saying this. The two of them reached the amphitheater, where the staff would present the test. "No, you have a point. Well, here goes nothing." Izuku sensed that the place was packed before he even entered the door. The estimated number of examinees was several hundred. Izuku was brought back to reality by Ochako pulling at his arm and asking, "Want to sit together?" She pointed to a couple of vacant seats close to the amphitheater's summit. Izuku, however, was still deep in meditation. Ochako pulled at his sleeve, and the touch helped him focus again. If All for One hadn't helped him control his hunger, he would already be attempting to leave this area as quickly as possible. "Oh, yes, sorry. I got distracted. That's a lot of quirks in the same room." Izuku saw Katsuki a few rows below them as they made their way through the amphitheater's rows. Ochako was signaled to turn around and go to the opposite side of the room. "You know him?" she inquired. The worst culprits were the professors, but other students also played a part. "We went to the same school for years. Don't get me started on his case. Our teachers made sure to feed his ego." With a tone of contempt, Ochako questioned, "That explains why I heard someone yelling, 'Extras,' just before he bumped into me. Is he always like that with everyone?" Izuku took a moment to think about his response. Teachers were the worst, but students also played a part. If you praise him, he might be more inclined to treat you like a lackey rather than an obstacle in his path. You were just taking notes, Ochako said in a whisper. How rude. I wasn't mumbling. No, I didn't notice, anyway. He really didn't have any reason to yell at you. Izuku gave her a smile before turning back to the presentation, relieved that someone was on his side for once. That's more awkward for him than you, Ochako said, giving him a light shoulder punch. After 2 hours of intense study, Izuku was almost positive he had aced the written exam, but his confidence faltered a little when it came to the essay section. Spending time with sensei had made his moral sense less conforming to society's standards, but he was still proud of his work. Izuku and Ochako had to part ways for the written exam. Izuku wondered who would be interviewing him as the students were gradually directed to meet with the school teachers. For a moment, he believed Nezu might have set up the interviews to reconnect with Ochako. Given the principal's character, that wouldn't have been shocking, but Izuku had asked not to be given any special treatment, and thus far, his request had been honored. Izuku was told to go into a small room and wait for his interviewer at a table, and after about 2 minutes, the door opened to reveal. I apologize for being late, but switching from one room to another can be more exhausting than you'd think, the man said, his voice tense, as he walked around the table and dropped a couple of files. My name is Toshinori Yagi, and I will be your. Izuku froze, his heart sinking, and the exam became a nightmare. A slim-looking man rushed into the room, barely acknowledging Izuku before hastily closing the door behind him. All Might recalled, and Izuku wished he hadn't. His smile was abruptly replaced by a serious frown. All Might, thank you, but can I ask to have someone else conduct my interview? Quote. For an extended period, the skeletal figure sitting beside him was unable to speak, valuable time evaporating from a meeting with the symbol of peace. You applied nonetheless. You're doing something wrong, my boy. By repeating the same cruel remarks as others, the man was already attempting to dash Izuku's hopes. I told you, you can't do this job without a quirk, he added, emphasizing the point. You should stop now. Why must you inflict such pain on me? Izuku's heart was pounding. Don't you merely see the positive side of people? Why don't you just help them? You know nothing about me, and you don't even know who I am. I'm being honest. This is the best advice I can offer you. I was left alone on that rooftop by you. How about if I'd leapt? What if I had opted for the simple solution? It was never about being honest. You just wanted to wash your hands of me because even you can't accept your own answer, Izuku said, his hands shaking and hurting in a manner he couldn't quite comprehend. You don't realize how difficult our task is. As the symbol of peace, I have been doing this for decades, so I am familiar with the tragedies we encounter on a daily basis. You can't handle the threats we have to defend people against if you don't have a quirk. Now, pay close attention to what I have to say, All Might continued. I'm not paying attention. The sparks of Izuku's quirk were revealed as he suddenly sprang up and slammed his right hand against the table, accidentally activating All for One. He panted heavily, recognizing a little too late that he could have gone too far. Did he regret it? Not at all. The interview ended with an electronic alarm, and Izuku left the room without waiting for All Might to respond, almost bumping into UA's small principal, who for once had a deadly serious expression on his face as he swung open the door. Izuku stammered, Principal Nezu, I can explain, but the mouse-like creature raised its paw, signaling that no words were required. Midoriya, I'll verify your interview. You may go study for the practical test. The interviewer needs to speak with me. What did you, Yagi? Nezu exclaimed incredulously, I can't even begin to imagine what made you say that to Midoriya. Why, in fact, would you say it to anyone? Quote. Because that is the truth. You can't keep the poor kid in an illusion forever, Yagi replied in a frustrated tone. He will eventually need to take charge of his life and discover something he can truly achieve. Nezu, I should be the one to inquire as to your mental state. This young man will murder himself. Yagi, you are so obstinate. Contrary to popular belief, Midoriya is more mature and aware of what it means to be a hero. They are as aware of the dangers as we are, and they only want to help. They don't care about becoming the world's greatest hero. After that, they can work as a police officer or firefighter. Quote. You know why they asked you if a quirkless person could become a hero. It's not about being a hero, it's about showing people that nothing is impossible with enough effort and the right drive, Nezu replied calmly. Quote. What? Quote. That's because Midoriya has a quirk. All right, was it not a coincidence that I noticed the red lights surrounding his hand? There was a touch of surprise in Yagi's voice. But according to his paperwork, he's quirkless. It is against the law to keep your peculiarity a secret or not report it. Midoriya made this decision for good reasons. My own research into his past has revealed a horrific story of abuse and bullying. Nezu opened All Might's file and pointed to specific details, saying, the problem is that I couldn't uncover the whole story. He was registered as quirkless since he was 4 years old, living with his mother, unemployed, but receiving monthly amounts of money from his father who supposedly works overseas. In relation to that, Mr. Midoriya sincerely wanted to vanish. I was unable to locate him. The funds he gets, though, do not originate from any illicit sources. Why are you narrating this to me? I've decided on these things, Nezu. Some people aren't cut out to be heroes. A lot of marks on his record, mostly for class disruption and psychological harassment, Nezu went on, which turns out to be nothing more than uncontrollable mumbling, probably because he was being stressed. Did you know that in order to discover that none of the material pertaining to Midoriya was accurate, I had to have teachers arrested? After everything he's been through, this young man could have given up at any time. So why would he conceal his oddity? Why ask me if a hero can be someone without any peculiarities? What's all this drama about? For what am I being held accountable? Quote. He shared his eccentricity with me during our interview a few months ago. Now, I've done a lot of searching before you leave, and there isn't the slightest indication that him and Izuku Midoriya are connected. Nezu, get to the point, please. Izuku Midoriya has almost the exact same quirk as All for One. The idea of someone having the same quirk as that hideous villain made All Might shudder. His mind raced, knowing that he needed to get in touch with Tsukauchi, Night Eye, and even Gran Torino because they couldn't let history repeat itself. Fear turned to rage and fury. And you allowed him in. Nezu, if he begins to steal quirks. Look at you, making assumptions. Just a minute ago, you thought he was a strange, untalented person with no potential, but now you see him as the new All for One. I'm not even sure what to think, Yagi. Would you mind taking a moment to acknowledge how many mistakes you are making? Quote. Trying to take in the information, All Might got up and paced the room. You knew for months, and you didn't tell anyone about it. Quote. Why ought I to? Based on your response, this poor child would have been imprisoned in Tartarus or worse in a matter of hours. You've done enough harm already. Midoriya merely wishes to assist others. Is it really that difficult to believe? Quote. It was difficult. Midoriya, he didn't know All for One. I'll be damned. All Might knew that All for One was a greedy monster who had lost his humanity years ago and had no morals. My viewpoint on the subject is unchanged, although oh, what have I done? I actually shoved that kid. The symbol of peace tugged at his hair. Quote. Don't be so theatrical. You haven't made him a villain. The only thing I intended to do was wake you up. I hope I've been successful. Let's get to the observation room now. I have a feeling you won't be let down. I suggest listening to you say run now. The symbol of peace was a quirkist, and now Izuku had no doubt about it. Izuku wasted little time in the locker room, especially with Katsuki close by. He tried to clear his mind, but he couldn't help thinking about what All Might had said. There were roughly 50 or 60 examinees in his group for the practical exam, and Izuku hurriedly looked around, trying to find Ochako among the throng of nervous faces. With the help of All for One, it took only a few seconds to find her, and she stood there, taking deep breaths, and Izuku hoped her interview had gone well. You once more, what did you think you were doing? Screamed the examinee who had scolded Izuku during the presentation. Quote. Stop bothering everyone. You won't get far with it. I ought to report you. Goo. The loud, high-pitched voice of Present Mike resonated through a couple of speakers as the doors of the examination area burst open. The examinees hesitated for a moment, wondering if this was the signal to start the practical exam. What are you waiting for? Go, I said. Quote. On the second occasion, there was no time for contemplation. Everyone hurried inside, disregarding anyone who could be in their path. Izuku discovered too late that his preparation had been inadequate. He ought to have collected quirks while he was with the other examinees, but now he was quirkless, with few choices and little time to arrange combinations. Attempting to keep up with the other examinees, he managed to absorb a body-hardening quirk, something like parkour, and a basic speed boost quirk. Not the most thrilling combination, but it would have to do. But the disorganized use of quirks around him also made it difficult for him to concentrate. In order to save energy for the test, Izuku had not yet fused the peculiarities. After 15 minutes, he had scored 45 points, which was more than sufficient, and he also saw that the number of active robots was gradually declining. When there were no more robots to go on, the test appeared to be over, but where was the fourth type? The earth shook as he thought so, and he heard nearby demolition noises, and quirks scattered from a certain spot, signaling the release of the troublemaker, as Present Mike had dubbed the fourth model of robots. Izuku was glad he had decided to find all for one, for he would not have been ready for this without his training. Izuku started for the door when he noticed something strange. Ochako's oddity was alone and motionless among the others that were strewn from the fourth robot, and a horrible thought crossed his mind. If she was in danger, why wasn't anyone turning around to help? Izuku ignored his fatigue and ran in her direction, soaking up as many quirks as he could in his rush, gathering oddities pertaining to force push, heating, electricity, and even prescience, but how was he to sort them all together? The next intersection had a sharp curve, and Izuku was in the shadow of a gigantic robot, taller than the tallest structures in the made-up city. How had this creature gotten here? He looked down to see Ochako buried beneath fallen debris as the robot appeared. She was hurt but still conscious. Ochako, wait, Izuku shouted as he got closer, realizing that he needed to deal with the robot first and that it would take too long to extricate her from the rubble. Run, Izuku, I'll be all right. Everyone had left her, but not him, Ochako informed him. Izuku knew this was a bad plan, but there was nothing else he could do. The giant robot gazed down at them and started to raise its left hand in preparation for an assault. His first spontaneous move would be this one, all for one. The singular. Izuku used the first 3 quirks he had acquired at the start of the test to run up a building, summoning all the remaining quirks he had absorbed on the way there. The power surge was instantaneous, giving him the impression that he could blow up a star if he so desired. Izuku climbed up the arm of the enormous robot, unleashed every quirk he could think of, and the result was chaos, metal melting, breaking into pieces, twisting itself as he ran up to the robot's shoulder. The robot was slow but massive, and it redirected its attack toward Izuku but was unable to catch him. It was perfect. He could barely control the quirks, but that wasn't necessarily a bad thing, and Izuku released his grip on them, causing a display that looked like a fireworks show, and he couldn't even tell how many quirks he had taken, but there was a blinding light, and when it was all over, the robot's head had been obliterated. The robot's arm moved upward in an attempt to throw him off, sending Izuku into a freefall just above the robot's head. Izuku, who had about a minute left, planned to use the telekinetic push and the skin-hardening quirk to lessen the impact of his fall at the last second, but Ochako's hand struck his face, freezing him in midair as the rest of its body started to explode or collapse, and he could feel the quirks he had absorbed slowly dissipating. Ochako stumbled, sorry, bringing both hands together, a motion that seemed to counteract the effects of her quirk, causing Izuku to cease flying, but Ochako ended up throwing up, probably from overusing the quirk, and Izuku was also at his limit. Izuku managed to rise back up and say, "And no, thank you for the save," as he surveyed the debris pile, trying to figure out the safest route to free Ochako. "I'm getting you out of here, just give me one. Beware." Ochako's warning allowed Izuku to activate what was left of the hardening quirk, shielding them from a large piece of falling metal from the robot. They didn't have much time before the whole area would collapse on them. Izuku, quote, "I'll lose it quickly." Izuku attempted to take in Ochako's peculiarity, but he was unable to concentrate. I need your hand, do you trust me?" he warned, quote. Izuku grabbed her hand and pulled, absorbing her peculiarity immediately and without resistance, while Ochako nodded and reached for him. He used his other hand to clear the debris that had fallen on her, and as he was free, he dragged Ochako out. "I'm sorry, I have to confront your peculiarity head-on. I had no other choices. It's fine, I don't mind if you copy my quirk." "No, I accepted it." Izuku didn't want to see Ochako's face. Did she feel betrayed or afraid? I should have informed you when we first met, but I wasn't sure how you would respond." You can't be blamed. Feel free to use it, though. I can feel less weight on my leg, and it doesn't hurt that much," Ochako said, pausing as a sincere smile spread across her face. "It's meant to save lives." After removing the gravity-altering effect from Ochako's body, he carried her away from the scene, putting her above the ground so she would be lying down when he deactivated the quirk. Oh, Sorry. Izuku rushed to finish freeing her. How do I deactivate it again? Quote. Ochako gestured to Izuku. Just touch the tips of your fingers against each other, like this. She landed gently on the pavement, and the debris that had been in her way fell with a loud thud. You did fantastic. Try to sit down for a moment if you're feeling ill. I will try to hold my stomach together. Izuku held out his hand to her and said, take back your quirk. He had to acknowledge that Ochako's quirk's side effects were difficult to cope with. I fear that someone will yell at me once more if I hold it for too long. When he pushed her quirk back to her, Ochako shuddered a little and said, thank you, Izuku. Does it feel like way all the time? To accept eccentricities. I simply felt as though my arm was rushing with energy. Really, I haven't taken many peculiarities. The second was yours. I mainly practiced taking quirks with my mother otherwise. To absorb peculiarities is quite another. I get temporary versions, and people may still utilize their oddities. But doing so is more taxing. How are you, Izuku? How many peculiarities did you absorb during the battle with the robot? Quote. I didn't count, I see. On the way here, I simply collected whatever I could find. I'd say 40, and perhaps a couple more. I make an effort to consider what I'm getting and how it functions, but I utilize everything at once. I'm relieved I didn't make a mistake. What's up? That was amazing. You thought, bam, bang bang, leap and boom. That was really awesome, but I wish I could have seen it clearly. Quote. Thank you. How is your leg feeling? Quote. Oh, there's nothing twisted or crushed. I suppose it was simply under a lot of pressure. Izuku hadn't been aware of what he was doing at the time, he just behaved as the situation developed. He only wished he didn't have a strange expression on his face. Thank you for carrying me away. Both teenagers blushed as they realized how close their circumstances were. There you are, An elderly woman in a medical blouse approached them from behind and said, you, Greenie, look fine. I thought that thing had really hurt a couple of examinees this time. But your friend, would you mind? Izuku was one step ahead of Ochako, who was ready to inquire who they were. Healing, your quirk, are you a girl in recovery? Quote. Exactly. Izuku attempted to catch the wrapped-up gummy candy that the hero fumbled in her pocket and tossed at her. Now as you mentioned, it appears that nothing is fractured, but the pressure must have stopped the blood flow. For the next several days, you may experience some soreness, but you are okay. To speed up her healing process, Recovery Girl planted a quick kiss on Ochako's forehead. Ochako had not anticipated receiving a kiss from an elderly woman that day. As she made her way to the exit, the doctor explained, I shall talk to our dear principal about not sending the apocalypse over our dear examinees. Izuku helped Ochako stand up, offering to support her if she felt like she couldn't walk, but she was mostly fine now because of Recovery Girl's quirk, and the two followed the doctor. Though it seems the apocalypse is no match for you, right? Again, what's your name? Yes, Midoriya. The principal genuinely likes you. This year's practical exam had revealed an incredible pool of talent, and Nezu found himself nodding in agreement with the assessments being exchanged around him. His furry face was a picture of deep contemplation, well aware that nurturing such potential was essential to the future of heroism at UA. The atmosphere in the observation room, a hive of bustling teachers and staff, buzzed with a mixture of excitement and awe. The symbol of peace was in the middle of a personal revelation, but All Might appeared to be in a meditative reverie, his gaze focused on the monitor showing the examination grounds, his famous grin softened into something more introspective, something that suggested a deeper understanding. You see, selflessness. That's the height of heroism, isn't it? I have searched, and no one else even considered looking for victims, Nezu said, breaking the ice between them. Well, aside from Shinso Hitoshi, who has a really fascinating brainwash peculiarity. Without the interview mechanism in place, we would have disregarded it. Now deep in contemplation, All Might nodded slowly. You're right, Nezu, I see it now. His grin. When I'm on patrol, I wish I could actually smile like he does. It's just hopeful and pleasant, not a mighty. And he was a natural when he faced the Colossus. Is it possible for me to apologize to him? Quote. Of course you can, Nezu said, adjusting his glasses, his beady eyes displaying an unsaid pity. When he is in your class, you will have plenty of time to do so. With a charming view of the busy UA campus from the towering observation windows, Nezu went on, his hairy ears twitching with mild enjoyment. Did you anticipate this? Quote. Just to put him in your class, Nezu said, his eyes gleaming with knowledge, because he won't become a copy of All for One if given the correct influence. If you can watch over him, I'm sure you'll feel better. Ochako had to walk through the infirmary for a checkup following the exam. She had been diagnosed previously, so thankfully she wasn't hurt, and as a bonus, she took a load of candy with her. There was an unpleasant silence as the majority of the other examinees had already left the school grounds. Izuku didn't want this day to end, and he could see the gate. Do you need help getting back home? It's not even late, so I can take a detour if you feel that you need to. Oh, and no, it's fine. I don't feel anything anymore. I can go back on my own. Plus, if my friends saw someone escorting me, they might get jealous. As naive as he was, Izuku obviously misinterpreted. His smile faded and his eyes grew wide. Ochako acknowledged that Izuku was to blame for her incorrect notions. With a swift correction, she waved her hands in front of her left and right. I meant girlfriend. We rent the same apartment. She is really nice, but she can act like a yandere from time to time. Izuku felt less uneasy as a result, although the young man was now flushed. Oh, so sorry. I didn't mean to. It's fine, really. I don't care if you, well. Ochako shuddered with embarrassment and discomfort. I meant to say she is my girlfriend, female friend. The two turned their heads away from one another, not expecting to find themselves in this predicament. Izuku interrupted the stillness by asking, You think you did well during the exam? I think I got about 30 villain points. These robots weren't as sturdy as I expected. Sending them levitating for a good crash afterward was enough to disable them. When Izuku got home, he gave his mother an update about the entrance exam. The interview had been awful, but the written portion had been fun. All these months had passed since his initial meeting with the hero, and he was hesitant to bring up All Might. But now, was there really anything he could do? It was time for him to move on. He talked about the roof, All Might's assistants, and the sludge villain. And that's why I had the worst possible interview for about 5 minutes with the symbol of peace. Sorry for not telling you earlier. He exhaled deeply. I should not care about what he says, but it hurts a lot. I'm not looking up to him anymore. As usual, Izuku went to All for One's basement the following day and went in without knocking. But this time, All for One wasn't by himself. Izuku could discern that the villain was sitting at a table with a short, elderly man in a white blouse. He was a doctor. Izuku sensed an underlying strain in the tense atmosphere of the gathering. Izuku asked cautiously, Hello, sensei, am I interrupting something? Izuku was certain he had seen the doctor someplace since he seemed familiar. Their agitated faces, more scarred than shocked, suggested recognition. If it isn't Deku, I was about to lose patience. I apologize, doctor, but our appointment will have to be postponed. I trust Kurogiri will escort you back. The doctor picked up his belongings and made his way to the exit, pausing for a moment to gaze at Izuku, who resembled the teen they were trying to replace in their memory. Why yes, of course. I will keep going as planned. After that, they carried on with their journey. Izuku carefully inquired, Did I interrupt something? One got up and rummaged through the tea shelves, saying, Of course not. That poor doctor, though. You gave him quite the scare. He might actually get some gray hair this time around. Izuku helped the villain after observing his struggles. He pointed to the area, on your left, behind the cups. The villain pondered, Oh, indeed. Why did I even put it back there? I'm getting distracted. Please go on, tell me everything about the entrance exam. What did the rat have in store for you? Izuku sat in front of All for One and hung his bag on a chair. Not much. At least, nothing that I wasn't expecting. The written exam was fun, though it wasn't much of a challenge. It did help a lot to clear my head and forget about. Izuku's words were lodged in his throat. He paused for a second, feeling the pressure in the air. Well, never mind that. The practical exam was the real deal. The robots were easy to handle, and I managed to score around 40 villain points. But there was this colossal robot wreaking havoc, and while everyone was running away, I felt that Ochako wasn't moving. I gathered as many quirks as I could on the way and gave everything I had against the robot. Note to self. Never release all the quirks at once unless it's an emergency. Had it not been for All Might, I'm sure I could have hacked my way into UA to get the recordings. Now I want to see you in action. Izuku closed his eyes and tried to recall how the energy flared brightly through his muscles and how each quirk had seemed to flow with him voluntarily. You were right. When I was using all these quirks at the same time, I felt like nothing was impossible. I thought I could burn out the sun if I wanted. I want to feel that again. All for One put on his helmet again while suppressing a cough. I understand the feeling. We have most likely the greatest quirk to ever exist, but, one said. There's one that might as well be on par. For once, I feel like I don't want to know this story. Izuku acknowledged. All for One, he thought, was in a terrible mood. The villain seemed more disappointed than angry. All Might's quirk. Your fight against him. No, please tell me it's not. Shigaraki paced around the room to get his thoughts straight before saying, One for All. A terrible power I created by accident. I guess it's about time we talked about it. Let's start from the beginning. Once upon a time there were two brothers who lived together with quite terrible parents. They survived. They dreamed of a world with just a bit more fantasy, a world of heroes and villains. A fateful day one of the brothers received the power to take everything for himself. He could create this perfect world or at least get close enough from it. But his brother didn't have the same point of view. Eventually they had a disagreement and the elder brother made a mistake. He gave a quirk to his brother. When All for One finished the introduction to his tale, Izuku knew exactly what was happening going. Izuku concluded, your brother received One for All in the first place. But that was, like a couple centuries ago. Remorse made Shigaraki's palm tremble. Fate brought up the opposition I had not encountered yet. I never fought my brother, how could I? He had the ability to allow quirks to transfer between people without destroying themselves. One for All merged with my brother's quirk and it became the very first. Quirk singularity. My brother gave One for All to someone. Their quirk merged with it, then this person gave One for All to another and their quirk merged again, over and over and over again. Until All Might arrived. So far none of the previous users could sustain the physical strain of One for All, but All Might had a passive quirk that hadn't been registered in the past. His body was able to stretch and absorb or diminish almost any kind of damage it would receive, so far. The symbol of evil looked down at his second protege. All for One tried to comfort Izuku by saying, you wished you hadn't heard this story now, his tone softening as he revealed the upsetting specifics of his background. Leaning in, he addressed any queries the young man might have had while highlighting the seriousness of the revelation. With a cunning glance, All for One stated, I had to tell you, All Might is weakening. The injury I inflicted on them wasn't threatening their life but rather their time as a hero, assessing Izuku's response. Izuku asked in a curious yet worried tone, they want to pass on One for All to someone at UA, another student. He leaned back, his eyes narrowing in anxiety, and All for One's face darkened. Most likely, he has seen your quirk, everyone has. Izuku, I want you to be very careful. All Might has a lot of friends who know about One for All and who wouldn't hesitate if they were asked to commit an actual crime if it meant ensuring their victory over what All for One represents. The greatest mistake of my life might become yours. Izuku took the warning to heart and nodded slowly. Did they think you are dead? Chances are they do. Well, not all of them. Night Eye is the most zealous of All Might's friends. Even if they showed him my body and I was dissolved into a powerful acid before his eyes, he would say it wasn't really me. Izuku bent his head curiously and said, you mean Sir Night Eye? I know he worked with All Might, but I thought they had a disagreement. I do not know what it was all about, but I'm almost certain it's about One for All. All for One's tone turned analytical as he turned to face Izuku. I investigated about this, turns out All Might was being pressured by his friend. Izuku, no matter what they say, remember you are a hero. Izuku's reaction, I already know I am. I just need to live with it, was a mix of acceptance and resolve, offering insight into the depth of his feelings as he dealt with the difficulties that lay ahead. Izuku did not achieve anything over the following week. For once, he could actually relax. For obvious reasons, the topic of One for All was prohibited from their chats, and he continued to visit All for One. Nezu himself registered a message on a device that was sent on Sunday, congratulating him on his exam performance. In both the written and practical tests, he received the top ranking. Saving Ochako by eliminating the zero-pointer had earned him more rescue points in a single action than all the smaller villains he eliminated, suggesting that his quirk analysis had been greatly appreciated. He had accomplished it, and now it was his hero academia. As was to be expected, Inko had prepared Katsuden for the event. It was intended to be a somewhat peaceful evening, but Inko had other ideas. The following day, Izuku intended to go tell All for One and express gratitude to the villain for his assistance on the same day. As they were eating supper together, his mother abruptly said, "I know you have been meeting with someone, Izuku." Not wanting to engage his mother with All for One, the young guy froze. "Mom, Inko held out a hand, indicating to Izuku that she should speak first. "I do not mind. You have grown so much, perhaps thanks to them. I guess I can understand why you didn't tell me. I always worry a lot, maybe too much. I think I can trust your judgment. You should invite them over for dinner at some point. I'm certain they are really nice." Presenting All for One to his mother, the young guy swallowed. "No, I don't think they enjoy social interactions a lot. I'm sorry for not telling you. I really needed the help of someone who could understand how my quirk feels. I do not blame you, but from now on, please tell me when you are visiting them." Izuku stumbled, his voice containing a mixture of conviction and hesitancy. I will, Mom." The phone rang around the same time. Inko got up and briefly left the kitchen to respond to it. "Yes, who is this?" Inko asked in a tone that was both cautious and curious. The caller screamed over the phone, "Inko, we have an emergency," and Inko had to pull away from the thing. The voice was familiar to her. "Good evening to Kyudai." Kyudai Garaki, the doctor and All for One's right-hand man, was a genius, a mad genius, to be sure, but she had to acknowledge that his medical and scientific knowledge was possibly a century ahead of our own. They respected their roles, but they didn't like each other as individuals. "Don't. Kyudai. Me. I have been searching for weeks, but I'm sure of it now. It was your son, that green patch of messy curly hair with the marks on his cheeks. He is meeting with you no WHO. Inko interrupted, her tone calm but firm. "Congratulations, doctor. They have been meeting each other for the last few months. Now, can you stop yelling? I'm not alone. The TV is on at least so we are partially covered." With a tinge of sarcasm in her voice, she continued, "Great diagnosis, by the way. Do not push it. Mistakes happen. How was I supposed to know you? You seduced him. You, Kyudai said angrily. Inko interrupted, making sure Kyudai had taken in the threat and paid close attention to the tone she had employed. "Doctor, you are about to step on a very thin line," she said. "Now I hope you have regained your good sense. First of all, this was a one-night thing, and I never imagined it would happen like this. Second, Shigaraki must never learn about it, but I assume this was obvious." The doctor's tone demanded an explanation as he said, "I always wondered why of all the things you could ask to claim your favor you wanted me to help you with your pregnancy. You entrusted your child in my hands to bring him into our world, why?" The tone of Inko's voice was a mix of certainty and censure. "You might be disgusting and devoid of morals, Kyudai, but you are a doctor above all. You wouldn't hurt someone for your own amusement. Kurogiri did convince me of that fact." With his tone now focused on the crucial revelation, he went on, "You want to make me cry now. Spare me the sympathy. I know how humans work. This mentality will get us all killed. But back to your son. He has it. He has All for One. How did I not see it?" Inko asked in a rather condescending tone, "You are the scientist here. Please tell me you didn't just check if he had an extra bone at his foot." There was a little pause before the doctor answered. "Young children tend to develop their quirk factor when they are 4. There are always some traces even if the quirk is weak or undetectable. The extra bone is just a physical hint. Your son didn't have any quirk factor at all, but it makes sense in a way. All for One doesn't rely on quirk factor. That's how it's able to mutate and fuse quirks at will. It relies on its own code, if I may say." The physician attempted to justify himself by demonstrating the phrase, experience. Her tone changed to one of real concern as she asked, "My son is going to UA. Can I trust you to cover any leaks? For both his and Shigaraki's interests." Considering possible findings, the doctor pondered, Yes, I can arrange that. Are there any mutations compared to him?" Inko established a requirement, stressing the necessity for prudence. "If we are discussing specific details, this will happen face to face, and I insist for Kurogiri to be around." With a hint of worry in his voice, the doctor questioned. "He knows." With assurance in her voice, she said, "He was the first to figure it out. Thankfully, I can trust him to never reveal anything even under torture." Kyudai's tone changed to one of professional inquiry as he said, "I need to run additional tests on you. You must have some sort of corruption quirk. There was a challenge in Inko's voice now. Try me, doctor, at your own risk. Just as he started to vent his frustration on the other end of the phone, Kyudai hung up. Inko returned to the kitchen, where Izuku continued to watch TV, flipping between channels, searching for oddities to examine. Who was this? Inko asked, staring at Izuku, hoping for an answer. I had to reschedule an appointment with a doctor. They are a bit grumpy but compliant. Kurogiri, meanwhile, was making a list of the bar's supplies in a particular safe house because they were going to be welcoming yet another new member shortly. I will have to go refill our food supplies again. Since you and Dabi arrived, our consumption tripled, and no offense intended, I was just pointing out, fact. Ray laughed. You were so genuine, Kurogiri. I didn't know you had a silly side. Kurogiri had to push these weird ideas away, so he turned away for a moment. Silly. With his arms folded behind his back, All for One emerged in the kitchen and said, Please, Miss Himura, do not overload my most trusted henchman with emotions. Kurogiri hoped he had not found himself in this predicament. You were looking way better than you did when your son freed you about 1 year ago. I hope you feel ready to fulfill your part of our arrangement. Ray bowed and said, Thank you again for your hospitality. You can ask me anything. Bringing down Endeavor is the only thing I can do to help my children now. And it will happen. I will make sure it does. You have been able to recover in a safe environment, and I trust you are strong enough to prepare a full testimony. I'm certain I can entrust Tamura with convincing your son to stop being so stubborn and to untie his tongue. I would have said good luck with that, but you are right to trust him. Tamura has a unique charisma despite how asocial he is. He relates to Toya, Dabi, so much more than I do. All for One summed up Endeavor's crimes with ferocious enthusiasm. Attempted feminicide, attempted infanticide, imprisonment as well as physical and mental torture. Quote, Yes, I think this should be enough to have himself locked up in Tartarus. I should know myself, but even I didn't go as far as he did, though the torture and the imprisonment may have been part of my record, he stated before turning toward Kurogiri. I will need your help to assist Miss Himura while she makes her testimony. After receiving a nod of encouragement from the bartender, All for One went over to Kurogiri and whispered something to the villain. Your presence is soothing to her. While you may be emotionless, try to develop some empathy. It would help a lot. Why yes, sensei. Now, where is my protege? As All for One left the kitchen, he discovered Tamura seated on a couch with Toya Todoroki and a female who appeared to be Himiko Toga and had sharp teeth. Maybe, the villain reflected, Tamura wouldn't be forever trapped in his adolescent stage. If I win this time, are you gonna try to dust me again? Shut up and stop dodging already. Oh, if I lose, do I get to be angry and stab someone? Behind the couch, All for One loomed. No stabbing or disintegration in the safe house, children. Think about who has to clean up afterwards. Dabi lowered his head, not paying attention to their game. Tamura, your dad is here.
In the meantime, Tamura killed Dabi's character during this fleeting moment of distraction. But the rush of triumph kept him from protecting himself from Himiko's surprise attack. I won, the young woman exclaimed. To his astonishment, All for One stayed calm and just let his controller fall to the ground. He sighed, anticipating Tamura to trash yet another controller. Before turning to face him, his protege gave the girl with the pointed teeth an inquisitive gaze. Sensei, he said in greeting. Dabi and Himiko exchanged a look and realized it was a serious conversation. I see you are bonding with your friends, good. I think it's time for you to step into the spotlight. It has already been confirmed that All Might will be teaching at UA. What are your plans? Schedules, we need those. Once it's made public that All Might is teaching, the media will be swarming around UA. With a little push, we can break their defenses and let the vultures inside. This should cause enough chaos so that Himiko can sneak in and obtain a copy of the schedules. Yup, I even gathered some blood already, the blonde girl said. All for One said, excellent. What about you, Dabi? Recruitment with Jiren. If we are planning an attack, we have to gather some people. Turns out thugs are even cheaper than I thought. The point isn't to hurt the students, right? Just to keep them away from our business. If you are worried about your relative, I can assure you no harm will come to him. My brother, TCCHH, as far as I know, he is just like my siblings, gave up on mom and me as soon as it was convenient. They don't even try to keep their heads up, answered Dabi. At the rear of the room, he noticed his mother, who shared his knowledge that they were alone. All for One put his hand over Dobby's shoulder and said, "Your father will be a target in due time." The young guy seemed to appreciate the gesture. "It seems you do not need my help. I will be on my way now. Oh, Kurogiri, I need to speak with you in private." Kurogiri has been called to his basement by All for One. The bartender was a little worried about what might transpire during this meeting. He sincerely hoped that Inko's secret had nothing to do with it. "It's about Deku," said the terrible symbol without holding back. Kurogiri was happy that his illness allowed him to conceal his feelings and that his master had never thought of getting himself a mind-reading device or a lie detector. He wouldn't be that composed if All for One had discovered the real reason. "That young boy who keeps visiting you, sir, did anything happen? Was there any incidents?" All for One sounded hesitant, as if he was afraid of something. "Oh no, Deku is a good kid. He isn't in any trouble, nothing related to me, well, not directly." Kurogiri was not accustomed to witnessing his master's anxiety. He had been worried about Tamura's development himself, and All for One was not particularly troubled by the adolescent's unpredictable behavior. "He has been exposed to One for All. It had to happen sooner or later, but it did, and I'm not handling the situation as well as I expected to." The bartender attempted to calm the criminal icon, saying, "I'm sure there isn't much to be concerned about, sensei. You keep saying that young Deku is smart and courageous. If you told him the essential, then surely he will be able to stay out of troubles." All for One was justified on the grounds that, "I trust his ability to protect himself. What I do not trust is the mischievousness of the Commission and the fanatics orbiting around All Might. I can't keep an eye on him at UA since Tamura will be operating soon." All for One was cut by Kurogiri. "I apologize for interrupting, but on this side of the problem, how do you wish to handle their interactions?" For a brief while, the emblem of criminal activity was silent. "Keep them as far away from each other as possible. This won't be possible in the long term, but Tamura really wishes to terminate or at least humiliate All Might as soon as he can. This just so happens to be when Deku is part of his class." Shigaraki exhaled. "As I was saying, Tamura will be operating soon, and, kicking the hive, Mirai will run back to protect his cherished quirk as long as it hasn't been transferred, unless it has already." Kurogiri's gaze expanded. "We know who is supposed to become the next holder already. A student named Mirio Tagata, a miniature All Might as it has been reported to me. We can deal with him later, hopefully before he figures out how to use One for All. I'm relieved that he won't have All Might's resilience to injuries and quirk overuse. Warp villain. Should Tamura be aware of this? As for Deku, think of him as a VIP. He needs to be protected but not informed of your role in our relationship. He cannot until." All for One coughed in his hand. Kurogiri turned red. "Not yet. He has to stay focused on his aim. Call." The mist villain then disappeared after saying, "I will contact the doctor right away." Inko had told the doctor to meet her at a random cafe later that day, which was fortunately less well-liked than anticipated. Kurogiri was unable to attend since he needed to prepare with Tamura. It brought back memories of her naive encounters with Shigaraki. They were so immature then, and now they were elderly and bound by their own troubles. When the doctor arrived, he was dressed in civilian clothing and had a large scarf over his neck to cover his lower face. He called her Miss Heartbreak, a reference to her peculiarity and possibly a reference to her connection with All for One. "You were late," she made fun of him. "A common friend of ours was feeling ill, too much stress, though given our line of work, I'm used to this kind of calls," Kyudai started explaining. With a hint of cynicism, he concluded, "And before you ask, yes, they are feeling better already. And it will stay that way, assuming they do agree to sleep and let their body do what it's naturally able to," suggesting that All for One would not do what his doctor had advised. "Good, then let's talk. What do you want to know? How old is he now?" 14. "Just recently, yes. He is a perfectly healthy and mentally stable boy," Inko said. The doctor pulled out a few paperwork and waved his left hand dismissively, saying, "You didn't have to be so specific, though I'm happy to hear about his well-being." The doctor cited precise facts pertaining to Izuku's absence of quirk. "I kept notes about him. That's all I had the time to analyze when he was born. Weight, blood type, quirk factor, inherited traits from his parents," the doctor said. "The same as his father. Back then, I didn't notice anything. Now I feel like a total fool. After all these years," Inko decided, "I guess I did a great job protecting him then," content with her choices. However, the physician merely chuckled. "What's the matter? You created a bomb none of us will be able to escape. He would burn the entire universe for you, and you had to give him a son, peak of irony. He thinks you married some random man, who I assume left you behind as soon as he learned his son was quirkless. And he doesn't even know he has family. What do you think will happen when he learns the truth? Because he will. You aren't delusional enough to believe that all is well in the best of the worlds, right, Inko? The former guard pushed the papers back in the direction of the physician. So what if he learns about Izuku? I will just adapt to the situation. His business stays as far away as possible from Izuku, or else I will be the one to burn the universe. All for one or not. I thought you would understand what it's like to care about other people. Kyudai's jaw clenched unnaturally, and his expression fell. That time is long gone. I will end up in the same hell as all these great minds who tried to change the world. As Oppenheimer said, now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds. Hopefully, I will be burning where you expect me to be before anyone has to go through the actual Quirk singularity. In order for Inko to pay for their drinks, the doctor got up from his chair and placed some cash on the table. But before he could depart, the former vigilante stopped him. We disagree on a lot of things, doctor, but know that I acknowledge your work and that I will be ever grateful for your efforts. Kyudai laughed. Thank you, Queen of the Underworld. It was strange and uncomfortable to be half compelled to inform his mother that he was regularly meeting with a villain. Izuku felt bad again for keeping his secrets from his mother. At least she didn't insist that Izuku invite the villain to supper as if they were family friends. Even so, All for One is still a buddy. Izuku continued on his journey to UA. Before turning in for the night, he had been talking to Ochako. They talked about how excited they were and what they thought the teachers were. Present Mike had interviewed Ochako, and Izuku was already aware of All Might. She was pleasantly surprised by how well her interview went. Present Mike was a great listener in addition to having the skills necessary to host a radio show. Ochako did her best to be truthful. To support her parents financially, she aspired to be a hero. Present Mike sympathized with her, telling her that it was okay to pursue your interests while prioritizing your own family. Izuku had been gazing at the enormous door for some time when he said, "Well, here goes." He sensed Katsuki's peculiarity in the classroom. Even if he had been quirkless, he would have had no issue recognizing that a particular explosive bully had already assumed his dubious proper place, as he was reminded by the loud noises emanating from inside the room. Izuku. He hadn't noticed Ochako coming since he was too preoccupied with the interior of the room. You are so easy to spot, wild green hair, red shoes. He pointed to the door and said, "Oh, hey Ochako. This is the room." Izuku had seen people of different sizes, but today it appeared utterly enormous. The little girl trotted over to where he was and waved. Notwithstanding her presumptions, Ochako asked, "For how long have you been standing here?" Just a few minutes. Nobody else entered, so I assume everyone is already inside. I'm a bit awkward with people, so I wanted to avoid having conversations. Also, with my quirk, it's like looking at an ice cream and seeing it melt in front of your eyes, Izuku said. Ochako retorted, "You are doing just fine with me, though." Izuku softly said to himself, "That's different, you aren't a complete stranger." Izuku turned to face the opposite end of the hallway and saw a yellow mass rolling on the floor. "Oh, someone is calm," he said. Like Izuku, Ochako was perplexed. It turned out to be a sleeping bag with a person inside. Izuku uttered the first phrase that sprung to mind, allowing his quirk to take over for a moment. Erasure. As it ascended, the sleeping bag peered down at the teenagers. "Okay, how did you figure this out?" Ochako put her hand on Izuku's back and shoved him forward just as he was going to back off. Well, I inhaled deeply. Izuku did as All for One said. "Your eyes, you have black marks, it's only partially due to a lack of sleep, your eyes are also red. I can see that just by looking at you. Now my quirk, it just gives me the feeling that you are repulsive. It's not what I meant, I mean it is, but your quirk is, but I think you are a racer head." He was wearing a black suit and a scarf made of some sort of elastic material, and the sleeping bag unzipped to expose the man inside. The professional hero, now known as a racer head, opened the door and entered the class, making his way directly behind the teacher's desk. "Great, you know who I am. You aren't completely useless, now get inside and head to your desk." Since his arrival took up the majority of the class's attention, Izuku and Ochako were able to enter covertly. It took you just about 8 seconds to quiet down, and even more to get back to your desks. This won't happen again. I am Shota Aizawa, but you will refer to me as Aizawa-sensei. Izuku discovered that there was only one seat left, directly behind Katsuki. He couldn't stay away from him for long. However, Ochako was able to seat just beside him. The gravity girl was going to object, but Izuku motioned for her to remain silent. Anyway, grab a suit and head outside to training ground Gamma. Eraser gave her a quick look but remained silent. The teacher just walked out of the room. Izuku straightened his seat as Katsuki got up, and the blonde turned a quarter turn and halted as he caught a glimpse of Izuku's face out of the corner of his eye. Yu Deku. Katsuki punched Izuku's desk, making a huge crack that was just big enough to split the table in two. What are you doing here, you quirkless trash? The pupils gazed blankly at the blonde's angry reaction. Stop. This is highly disrespectful. Why are you attacking one of your fellow classmates? Izuku recognized the domineering boy with blue hair and glasses who had confronted Katsuki about his actions. Katsuki walked away from Izuku and argued with the other youngster, saying, "Shut up, Four Eyes. This is between me and Deku." Ochako tugged at Izuku's uniform, diverting his attention. The gravity girl lowered herself and spoke to Izuku in a whisper. She said, "Let's leave this place." The other pupils didn't bother to question Izuku about what had just transpired, so he nodded and hurried out of the room. Before they left, they took 2 jumpsuits out of the cases at the end of the room. Ochako swallowed. "Has he always been acting so carelessly toward you?" Was a soft yet sardonic remark that covered up her contempt. Izuku chuckled as they ran off, uniforms in hand, saying, "I think his mood was justified considering I made it into UA and appeared behind like some horror movie villain." After that, Ochako appeared more serious. That look on his face though, priceless. "Why did you stop me from asking a question back in class?" He looked about for instructions and answered, half focused on his talk with Ochako. "Oh. I thought it was part of his test." "Test? You didn't notice the way he talks?" My friend taught me a bit about behavior. He is testing us, profiling us. I just didn't want you to get pinned as the disturbing girl from his point of view. He might be a cool underground hero, but he is deadly serious about the job." "I see. Thank you for stopping me then." Izuku grinned. "Let's just try to keep it low for now. You were about to ask about orientation." Ochako gave a nod. They noticed some other students wearing sports suits going outside, similar to them but not going to the same place, and said, "I was wondering about that too, but look around, it's just us in the corridors. We aren't picking orientations now. This is important though. I can't remember the last time I had Quirk counseling." The gravity girl was upset. Izuku wished he had a danger sense quirk right now. "I agree, this seems strange, but the other classes are doing just like us, so why not?" he said. They arrived at the training place after changing. When Katsuki saw Izuku, he decided against attacking him this time because of what had transpired with the other student. "Everyone is here. Let's get straight to business." Aizawa started his explanation by asking Katsuki to toss a ball once with and once without his quirk. "Back in middle school, you have gone through tests to record your physical abilities. They skipped orientation because of this." UA was continuing to profile them, testing the specifics of their peculiarities. Then one of the few students in the small group said that it appeared fun, and chaos ensued. Now they were in a doomsday situation where the person with the lowest score would be kicked out. Izuku found it difficult to accept. This was unjust. However, there appeared to be one clue that this was all a fraud. A purple-haired youngster among the pupils grinned at Aizawa's threat. Izuku walked up to him and addressed the matter directly. "Hi, I'm Izuku Midoriya." The child was taken by surprise, but he still answered. Izuku was ready to ask his next question when he sensed that Hitoshi's quirk was activating something inside of him. Oh, hi, Hitoshi Shinso. Based on responses. As he waited, he noticed the boy's expression change from one of friendliness to one of surprise. Izuku nodded and said, "You know. I won't use it, just don't tell anyone." Hitoshi nodded this time. "I won't. I don't know what it is, but I figure it's response-based." "Okay. I saw you smiling. You know something about these tests." Shinso grinned once again. "These lips are sealed. Was it always going to be that way?" Izuku made an effort to identify the one pupil in his class who had a striking resemblance to Eraserhead. "Are you in touch with Eraserhead?" The greenhead decided he might as well ask directly. With a shrug, Hitoshi stretched a little. You already have your answers it seems, just try not to slack. Izuku's head tipped. This was a source of inspiration. Hitoshi possessed a mind control quirk, if he was correct. However, this wouldn't make him weak, because he could easily defeat any opponent in a one-on-one match. If his mind control capabilities allowed him to order others around him, he could simply tell someone to take the test in his place. However, this also meant that he would lose his best weapon once people figured out how his quirk worked. This must have been known to Eraserhead before to the experiments. Hitoshi was more focused on playing an underground role because he knew that flaunting his oddity now would get him in hot water later. Izuku was happy that his sensei was considering his student's abilities. However, Hitoshi was correct. This was by no means an excuse for not giving this test his all. Aizawa took them straight to another test after Katsuki's toss, stating that the ball throw would be the final one. Weightlifting, running, long jumping, etc. vertical leap, which would make sense in some ways. Izuku wished he had considered taking his notepad, but it was the ideal moment to try out his classmates' eccentricities. Since he didn't want any attention right now, especially on the first day, he always made an effort to avoid using the same quirk twice or in front of the original user. He almost worried about breaking the device during the grip strength test because he absorbed a hardening quirk and a mutation from a student with numerous limbs. The combination of the two oddities helped him to achieve a very good score. The student from whom he got the hardening quirk said, "Wow, that's so manly." Upon seeing Izuku's score, the red-haired student said, "That's funny, I thought you had a strength quirk, not hardening like me." Fortunately, Eraserhead had not intended to allow his students to introduce themselves to one another on the first day. He was eager to get them through all of the examinations, so Izuku was spared from having to explain why his quirk appeared to be so adaptable. After a minute or two, the ball must have returned an error, and Ochako scored infinity owing to her peculiarity when they finally went back to the ball throw. To lift the Gravity Girl's spirits, Izuku gave her a thumbs up. Shinso's turn came immediately after hers. The rest of the class was perplexed and some started to inquire as to whether they could have simply teamed up from the start. "So I have to stay in the circle sure, can I call for help?" he asked Eraserhead. The teacher simply shrugged at the question. The student with the purple hair looked at Katsuki and gestured with his finger. "Hey, you, the firecracker guy." Katsuki instantly lost it. "What did you just call me?" It was now extremely evident that Izuku's body jerked all for one. "Throw the ball as far as you can, okay?" was Shinso's challenge, and the energetic blonde did just that, a full 400 meters. "Great, I don't need your help anymore." It appeared that Katsuki had come to. "What the?" he asked himself, looking around him in complete bewilderment. How did he end himself in a new location? Why did his thoughts simply stop for a moment? Eraserhead gestured to Katsuki, who muttered something and simply returned to the rank. "You can go back to your place, you are wasting my time." Izuku was already considering the limits, but this would have to wait until Aizawa called his name. Izuku used a combination of explosion and gravity to give the ball an initial speed, and he achieved the same outcome as Ochako, albeit a little more efficiently. Shinso truly had a wonderful quirk. After witnessing an explosion emerge from Izuku's palm, Katsuki gasped. With a nod of approval, Aizawa presented the findings. Izuku did somewhat better than predicted. "You showed a bit of potential. While your quirks aren't applicable in most situations, you still found creative ways to use them. Oh also, I was lying, no one will be expelled." Everyone was relieved. "For now," said Eraserhead. Katsuki bemoaned to Aizawa, "Now wait a minute. You are not expelling the quirkless freak." The blonde had lost his temper, and in Aldera, he would have gotten what he wanted. He didn't even. He must have cheated. There is no way he actual LT threw the ball so far. And the other weirdo, I don't know how he did it, he didn't throw that ball, I did. He didn't do anything himself, I worked hard to get here. Why should I work with useless cheaters? Both Hitoshi and Ochako gave Katsuki a scowl, primarily due to his remarks regarding Izuku. Aizawa was not going to follow in the footsteps of the Aldera professors who would have done everything to appease the explosive blonde. The teacher said, "Repeat that again." Izuku thought, he sure did, he had plenty of practice dummies at Aldera to do so. He didn't do anything. How did he even get in UA? I worked compared to him. I actually trained with my quirk. Aizawa gave an eye roll. The hero insists on having the last say, saying, two things, Hitoshi does have a quirk. Second, you are not in charge here, I am, which means if I decide that someone stays or leaves, it happens. Now, if I hear something like that coming out of your mouth again, I will be more tempted to make you leave. After Katsuki made a tremendous effort to remain silent, everyone returned to class, and Aizawa announced that orientations would take up the remainder of the day. Eraserhead was in charge of close quarters fighting and investigations, therefore Izuku was upset that there was no course centered around oddities or analysis. Izuku applied right away. You were taking this class too. I thought you would be more interested in All Might's course, said Hitoshi. The Greenette had assumed that if others had discovered how Hitoshi's quirk triggers, whatever it is, they wouldn't want to interact with him. Oh no, I know more than enough about hero history, and I am more interested in quirks in general than who was using them, no offense. Izuku felt bad for essentially pointing this truth out to Hitoshi, who said, I'm taking it in a good way, don't worry. People tend to look at you differently when they discover that your quirk can take away their free will. Once more. But he thought he could rely on Hitoshi. Izuku inquired for confirmation. I get the feeling, brainwash was it. And Hitoshi winked. Welcome to the club of scary quirks. Mine allows me to take other people's quirks. He said. This information surprised Eraserhead's clone. Hitoshi chuckled. For real? That's an absurd power. So can you take mine and use brainwash on me? I had rather not. Please, I always wondered how it felt. You just have to think about giving back control to cancel it. Hitoshi clarified. Izuku sensed uncomfortable. He copied Hitoshi's quirk and proceeded with his request. Okay, so you just answer a question. Yes. Hitoshi waited while Izuku attempted to use the quirk but was unable. Izuku took Hitoshi's hand and carefully tugged at the quirk, saying, Wait, I didn't take your quirk. I only copied a temporary version. Let me try to take it completely. This might be some sort of autoimmunity. Let's try again. When Hitoshi said, Sure, wait, what did you mean by tempo? His eyes enlarged, and he suddenly lost all emotion. Izuku quickly reversed the quirk's impact and returned his quirk to Hitoshi. Are you all right? That felt deep, like my consciousness got pulled back out of my body. I didn't feel alive anymore, but I existed. Hitoshi appeared to be somewhat rattled. Thank you for showing me. I think I get how it feels to be the target now. Nevertheless, he was content, which Izuku interpreted as a minor victory. So you can take quirks. Sorry I didn't believe you at first. It's just weird to think about quirks as something else than inherent attributes. They are. But, well, yes, there is a bit more about it. You can't always explain everything. Say, wanna hang out after school? Unless you are already hanging out with Ochako is it? Izuku waved his arms wildly, saying, no OC Ochako is just a friend. We aren't dating or anything. Hitoshi shrugged and said, yeah right. The following day began with a stronger sense of normalcy. Ochako ultimately presented Toru to Izuku, and Izuku formally introduced Hitoshi to Ochako. She was invisible because of her quirk, although it seemed to be passive and permanent. Izuku chose to keep his peculiarity to himself. Hitoshi might have been an exception, but given Toru's peculiarity, she would develop notions. Things would become problematic, but she was pleasant. Her voice was full with joy. Izuku questioned her about her peculiarities, what might have exposed her, and whether she had attempted to be seen using mechanical methods like radiation therapy or thermal scanners. She hadn't given this much attention, but during the interview, she was asked the same questions, and the interviewer even recommended that she ask the support courses, as they had the necessary tools to administer these tests. His three pals were giddy with anticipation. All Might was teaching today, and the symbol of peace would lead them to bravery. Fantastic. Izuku made an effort to sound as thrilled as they were. Izuku was able to remain next to Ochako and avoid having to deal with Katsuki by switching places with a boy named Kirishima. The teenager with the spectacles halted Izuku as he walked into the classroom. His classmate, who is always so straight and precise in all of his moves, bowed and said, I am Tenya Iida. I would like to apologize for my behavior during the entrance exam. I genuinely thought you were here to disturb the other applicants, but you obviously understood the true purpose of the exam. Izuku felt guilty. Tenya had taken the trouble to apologize, but it must be done. Thank you, but I can't accept your apology. You made assumptions, and you didn't seem bothered at all by how publicly you confronted me. So no, I can't accept your apologies, though I respect the fact that you recognized your mistakes. Izuku made a modest bow to him and left his place of work. Tenya appeared to accept his apologies despite his brief silence, which was accompanied by a shocked expression on his face. All Might showed up a few minutes later, bursting through the door in what he called a normal, or casual, manner. Izuku wasn't concentrating. All Might informed them that their requested outfits had been finished. The symbol of peace instructed them to put on their costumes and go outside to a simulated area for their practice. Did Izuku's limit drop again? Izuku sensed the pro deflating as soon as he left the room. One for all is a peculiarity. Izuku realized his case was empty before getting up to retrieve his costume. Above Izuku's shoulder, Ochako leaned. What's wrong? My costume isn't here. I'm sure I sent the designs though, I worked really hard on it. Izuku murmured. Do you have the sketches here? Oh yes, Actually, it's better if you don't see it, Ochako pushed Izuku's shoulder and said, oh please come on. Don't be shy, spoil me. The greenette groaned. Why not? They only had a few minutes to get to the training area. Izuku opened his notebook and rummaged through his backpack, turning the pages to discover his sketches. Ochako inquired, are these analyses? How many did you make? Izuku took a step back to give Ochako a better look and said, too many. Here, it's a bit well, that's what I want. The most unsettling aspect of his latest design, which combined all for one's concept with his mother's favored version, was the skull helmet. That's, why the helmet? Ochako made herself chuckle and said, yes. It's not about being reassuring for other people around you, it's about showing everyone that there isn't such thing as good and evil, there is only us. I was born with a villain's quirk, so what? I assume the way I was born. I want actual bad people to look at me in fear and reconsider their decisions. Izuku clarified, people remember your presence, not what you represent, it's like a symbol, like All Might's smile. This is my own smile, he said. Izuku's tone changed from one of serious determination to one of joy and enthusiasm as he said, also, it has a lot of advantages. It makes me immune to a lot of quirks, and it helps me to focus when I'm using my quirk. Wow, your costume is cool. I saw the boots for my costume, they actually put heels. I wanted shock absorbers like the ones they put on bikes so I can use my quirk on myself and drop from higher positions, revealed Ochako. Izuku remarked, mainly to himself, you could use that in combat. What? If you kick someone with the heel, the penetration should be more efficient and inflict a greater injury, also better chances of stunning your opponents since the shock is absorbed. Ochako exclaimed, Izuku. Too late, realizing that her pal had vanished from his own mental image. Izuku was compelled to wear one of Yue's simple sportsuits, which did not absorb any shocks and hardly shielded his arms. Izuku remarked, this is not going to end up in a good way, as he pulled on the sportsuit, already sensing that a few scratches may cause it to tear off. Hitoshi, dressed in a Yue, inquired, what happened to your costume? To fit his needs, couldn't come up with a design too. Izuku sighed, no, I think it got rejected, she said. The others look nice. They had a very vibrant class. Izuku knew that villains wouldn't use explosives unless they had a very specific plot, yet All Might portrayed today's practice as a simple bomb defusal scenario. It's a wise choice thus far, you never know what you'll be up against or facing on the field. You will be paired in teams. The teams will be created randomly, of course. Hitoshi and Izuku were matched against Mina and Denki. The practice abruptly devolved into an infiltration game because they were the hero squad. He could always bring the eccentricities of Toru or Ochako too. Midoriya, I would prefer if you didn't take any quirks before the beginning of the exercise, said Almighty. Why? Why should I limit myself to what I can get during the exercise? Izuku was upset. I'm sure you understand the exercise is about using what's available in a real situation. The point of the exercise is to work with your teammate against a randomly composed team. It's only fair if this applies to your quirk too. It didn't sit well with Izuku, but All Might was right. He nodded as the evil team was already being told to position themselves by the symbol of peace. Izuku had seen the building from the outside and thought the plan was straightforward, but he was unable to determine how resistant the entire structure was, so his own squad didn't have to make many preparations. Denki's electricity quirk was too dangerous to be used effectively without physical touch, and Mina's mutation quirk enabled her to produce acid. The issue was that he was attempting to analyze from very little in both circumstances. In fact, he hadn't witnessed them in action. Hitoshi was growing impatient as well. "You were mumbling. You got a plan?" he asked. Izuku felt betrayed, but Ochako was correct to tell Hitoshi. "Ochako told me to keep you partially present. You tend to go too deep in your own thoughts." "So sorry, Hitoshi. I was just thinking about what we can do against them. I don't want to rely on your quirk, plus it would be a problem if they discover how it works now," Izuku said. Hitoshi held out a disapproving hand. "Eraser-sensei said I had to be creative with my quirk. I will use it as much as I can. That's the only way to train my skills in deception. What about you? I assume you can't take or copy Mina's quirk, right?" Izuku felt bad about considering tampering with Mina's quirk. He couldn't do that to any of his classmates. "I could, but that would lead to terrible consequence. I could, never mind. Denki also worries me. He barely used his quirk yesterday, but I could feel it, electricity. And UA refused my costume. You're thinking about what to do if we have to fight them. What if we just get to the bomb like All Might said?" Hitoshi offered. Izuku's buddy was horribly correct about their true goal, and his mind went blank. "Oh, well, sure." Izuku and Hitoshi were permitted to step in once the villains had had all the time they had to get ready. They had a few possibilities for entry at the foot of the building, but I had considered sampling Ochako's quirk to enter directly from the top or another floor, but we don't have much choice. But I know where they are. Mina is roaming around while Denki is keeping the bomb. You can sense that, but All Might told you not to take any quirks outside of the exercise. That's part of my quirk. I can feel them around me, all the quirks, like shining point lights, Izuku attempted to clarify as they made their way inside. "So in which direction is Denki? If he is standing still in a single room, I can assume it's where they keep the bomb." Izuku indicated Mina's location to Hitoshi, who took her place. "4th or 5th floor, room near the middle, no window access I think, or that's a really large room." Mina was getting closer. The acid girl was using the provided radios to survey the area and report back to Denki every few minutes. Mina remarked, "2nd floor, nothing to see." As soon as Mina made a new report, Hitoshi slipped up behind her and, with hesitation, he approached her ear and said something. Hitoshi's quirk kicked in, and Mina looked back in disbelief, screaming, "What?" Mina was suddenly in his grasp. As he examined his work, the brainwasher said, "Well, that went better than I expected." Izuku questioned, "Just what did you tell her?" Hitoshi shrugged and said, "Anything that would trigger her really." There were sounds coming from Mina's radio. Denki was talking. Hitoshi looked at Izuku and said, "Hey, I heard a scream. Was that you?" Izuku waved back at his companion, telling him to do anything now, but to do it fast. Hitoshi turned on the radio and answered by mimicking Mina's voice. Izuku put both hands on his head and said, Everything is fine, Spider." The mimicry was not flawless, but it was still. It sounded a lot like Mina. They said, "Oh, okay, let's keep going then." Denki saw nothing. "A spider?" inquired Izuku. She screamed. "I had to find anything that was believable. How do we deal with Denki now? Can you order Mina to use her quirk?" "No, that's too complex. I can only order people to do basic actions. I'm still very limited with what I can do." Hitoshi shook his head, saying, "You can't order her to speak, for example." Give her a specific destination to go to." "I can as long as she has been here before. What do you have in mind?" "Can you tell her to attack or restrain someone?" Hitoshi thought about the query. Mina reached out to Izuku and embraced him, saying, "Grab him." Hitoshi noticed Izuku's flush and said, Stop. "I can," he said in closing. There seemed to be no temporal limit to Hitoshi's oddity. Hitoshi could maintain control as long as he remained focused. After they arrived at Denki's place, Hitoshi instructed Mina, "Run up to him and grab his arms, do not let him go." Mina dashed into the chamber. "Hey Mina, what's happening? Are you alright HUF? Denki said, not expecting the acid girl to hit him, much less try to hold him back. Izuku yelled. Now, Hitoshi was running by himself in the direction of the explosive. After giving up and releasing Mina from whatever was holding her, Denki tried to release one of his hands. He succeeded in aiming for Hitoshi, but his attempt to exploit his quirk was unsuccessful. I disabled your quirks. Izuku's red glowing palm was placed on his leg. I guessed you would be too focused on Hitoshi to worry about me. As All Might announced that the exercise was over and the hero team had prevailed, Denki moaned, "Oh man." All Might congratulated, saying, "Great performance." The exercise was being briefly debriefed to the students. Momo's hand instantly rose, and All Might gave her the opportunity to say, "You all did great, lose or win, experience is experience." Now, who was the MVP here? I think it was Hitoshi. He managed to do most of the improvisation for their strategy. Though Midoriya was also helpful to locate both of their opponents, he didn't do much apart from incapacitating Denki at the end. The main mistake of the villain team was to split up, I think. It wouldn't have been necessarily more efficient to search the building and leave the bomb unattended, but they could have waited together in the same room and potentially have higher chances of success. Momo continued. Both teams were disadvantaged by the lack of information about the other's quirks, she stated. All Might was trembling slightly. Company correct. That's more than I expected. This concludes the first round. Next up we have Ochako and Eijiro against Fumikage and Honta. Ochako was worn out when the class took a lunch break. After spending all of their preparatory time setting up traps around the facility, Honta said, "Too much tape. I don't want to see any more tape." It was even more difficult to navigate because the building was a jumble of knotted bands whenever they attempted to enter. Hiroshima punched his way through the walls, and they just about caught the explosives. I hardly see how else you could have proceeded, Izuku reflected on the test. Perhaps with support tools, but that was still a specific situation. Fumikage's quirk is really impressive too. Is it me, or does it get stronger when it's dark around him? Hitoshi asked. Guys, please, I don't want to hear about birds or tape until tomorrow, Ochako asked. What about you, Toru? Mezzo was clearly at an advantage against you with all his ears. Toru raised her arms in triumph, or at least that's what they observed based on the folds on her uniform. That's what we thought, but Kyoko was disturbing enough with her quirk to prevent him from finding me. Getting to the bomb was much easier. Say, Izuku, you can take people's quirks, that's what All Might says. Toru caught Izuku's attention. No, but. I can take quirks but no. Toru retorted, I didn't ask anything. You wanted me to take your quirk, to see yourself. If I do, what happens then? Toru was quiet. If you are curious, ask Aizawa-sensei to cancel your quirk, but I am not doing this. The invisible girl said, Izuku, I didn't want to ask you this way, and apologized. But I overheard you and Hitoshi yesterday, and I was curious. I remember seeing my face at some point, but I was 3. I think I'm blonde. Izuku swallowed. That's why I didn't want to. I wish I could help you, but your quirk is a part of you. Perhaps there is an artificial way to cancel it. I wish I could help, but what you had in mind is not an option. They ate in comparatively quiet silence, saying, No, you are right, my request was inconsiderate. Thank you for your suggestion though, it helps a lot. Then all of a sudden there was an alarm. People could hardly hear one another because it was so noisy. Some claimed it was an intrusion alert, and the students started to flee in various directions. With so many oddities swirling around him, Izuku was at a loss for what to do. His mind was too preoccupied to think clearly. Toru shouted, Look outside. It's just a group of journalists. Izuku was able to turn his head and see the UA gates were accessible. Ochako said, Hitoshi, use your quirk and stop them. I can't. It doesn't work like this. Izuku got up and gathered as many peculiarities as he could in his outstretched hands before leaping over the pupils. Everyone stay calm. It's just journalists. There is no need to panic like this. It took him a while to understand that his body had become even more disorganized than the stream of terrified pupils underneath him. However, he was able to capture their interest. How did he manage to float like this? Why did he feel liquid in half of his body? Has he recently developed a horn? The pupils seemed to settle down and took their seats in the lunchroom again. Izuku let go of the quirks and fell on the ground. He needed something to relieve the headache from using so many oddities at once, because he was panting. Ochako ran over to him and said, Izuku, are you all right? He lifted his hand just in time to keep her from touching him. Ochako nodded and remained close to Izuku, saying, Wait, please give me a few seconds to recover. If you touch me, I might lose control again. Take your time. That must have been stressful for you. Izuku leaned against a wall to assist himself, saying, I just moved. It won't happen again, I promise. I feel really drowsy. There are still a lot of people in the cafeteria. 47. You counted. Why yes, sort of. He was able to get up on both legs since he felt somewhat better. Let's go back to the simulation area. You got the documents. Going in and out of UA, Himiko was quite proud of her performance, unnoticed. Gathering the blood was the most difficult aspect. Jiren provided them with a uniform and they handled the rest. I got the schedules for the next 2 months. Great. Tamura took off his sweatshirt. Let's grab Dabi on the way and go home. Himiko walked around Tamura and said, he recruited some thugs like you asked. The league leader gave her a hoodie to conceal the UA. She was still dressed in her outfit. Tamura only cared to recruit those who genuinely believed in his cause. Yup, I don't care if these idiots get arrested in the process. They aren't worth anything. They are all looking for the easy way out. Dabi discovered someone with a low moral standard. Those who would trade their families for a little dollars. Himiko said, Sensei is going to be very happy. Yes. Tamura paused and peered into a deserted alley. The league head used his phone to send a message and waited, saying, I will call Kurogiri here. You weren't seen. What about our contact inside? No, I haven't seen him. I went straight to the objective, just as we planned. What's his deal? Why would he join our ranks if he already made it into UA? I met him at a convention. I thought he was annoying at first, but he is cool. We understand each other. He believes in a weird kind of peace, but a good one. He wouldn't hurt a fly. As Tamura had referred to him, Himiko was skeptical of their Trojan horse, and thought, our inside guy is weird, he couldn't just get these himself. Kurogiri's gap opened, and Tamura and Himiko entered the bar. That poses another kind of problem. He will give us information in due time, but he couldn't get these schedules himself. I'm going upstairs to get changed. Good lecture. The league leader sat at the bar and opened the first schedule, saying, thank you, I guess. Kurogiri had made him some iced tea. These are. Tamura knew exactly what he was looking for, the schedules, including All Might's activities. He just needed to rapidly filter through the material. Excellent. Speaking of which, Ray has been insistent about being a part of the league and Tamura was extremely stringent, saying, we are not bringing Dabi's mom on the field. He had seen this too often in video games and comics, where a parent is slain and everything instantly goes to hell. Kurogiri retorted, and he was correct, I'm afraid if you aren't involving her, she will involve herself. Tamura kept his composure and drank the iced tea. Tamura screamed out loudly, fine, Ray. Assuming she was somehow listening. Ray had just put on some muscle. Yes. Oh, Tamura, you are back. Do you need anything? Was she a trainer? Let me guess. The schedules from UA. Oh, this calls for celebration. What do you need? Tamura gestured for Ray to look at the folded schedule. I want you, with us.
I will continue the story in next part. Till then, bye bye.